Okay, good evening, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, so I'll call today's Committee of the Whole to order, please. I do wish to begin by acknowledging that we are holding this meeting on the territories of the Sooke Nation. So Council, I'll turn your attention to approval of the agenda, and as we are in Committee of the Whole, just remember that just one mover is required for every motion. So moved by Councillor St. Pierre to approve the agenda. Any questions or corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. And that puts us right into item 4, which is our reports. And for members of the public here, we'll look for time. Like usually the public input follows each item, but we'll see how the report goes and then look for opportunities in that segments or in the report session. Thank you. So I'll turn it over to staff, please.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. I'm just going to briefly introduce this and then hand it over staff who will take over the bulk of the presentation today. So the goal for today is to just provide council and the community more of a detailed overview of the inputs to the budget and the changes and the capital projects coming up and proposed for 2025, and just start the conversation with council for our 2025 budget cycle here in an official capacity. So the goal by the end of the day is staff are seeking direction from council for obviously, 16% we know is very unrealistic to be supported by council. So we're just looking for a high level estimate of a number that council is more comfortable with, and then staff, the plan would be to go away, work our magic with potentially reserve funds or other discretionary changes as directed by council through this meeting today, and then come back in February with a refined budget with a more detailed analysis of where we're going. At that meeting would be when all the department specific presentations would happen. Today, we're just trying to keep it at a high level and just not get too far in the weeds for today because there's a lot to get into. So just providing some general information, a bit more details on some of the bigger profile items, and then looking for some direction from council too, as we before we come back in February with a more realistic number that hopefully council will support. So yeah, just leading into this, and again, I think maybe every year we maybe sound like a broken record to the community, but it's another difficult budget year. There's inflationary pressures, we have internal growth pressures, we've got the loss of revenue for things like the utility tax, which again, Mr. Curry can speak to, is decreasing again. So to help offset that in the future, staff are constantly trying to identify new revenue sources. We're always trying to find the balance between what should developers pay and what should residents pay. We're very aware that, 80+% of our tax base is residential, not commercial. So that's why community economic development is so important to us. It's a big focus for 2025. Is to get these local jobs, get this commercial tax base into Sooke as quickly as possible. Council advocacy for things like cannabis revenue are things that we're going to be picking up in 2025 as council goes to UBCM and FCM conferences. And another topic that we're going to be looking to provide council with more information on this year would be, potentially invoicing for ambulance calls. The pressures is going up. Other munis are on that bandwagon, not bandwagon, misspeaking there, but other munis are understanding this, and eventually it's going to become too much. And so that's definitely some information we're looking forward to providing to council and getting some direction on whether it's advocacy or other things on how to help maybe offset those costs. It's complicated for sure. Some of the projects I'm personally excited to see in here are, from a capital side, are the revamp of our efficient community plan, our midpoint review of our transportation master plan, and our parks and trails master plan engagement. Those 3 documents are so crucial to how we do business in day to day when people are looking to build in Sooke. Those documents really set the stage of. And those documents are based on community engagement. What do you want your town to look like when it gets built out? And so staff use those documents that are building blocks when somebody comes in with a proposal of okay, well, the community said they want this here. And so that's what we ask developers to do when those projects come in. So it's very timely to get a midpoint review. I think the criticism we've gotten in the past is those maybe were done out of order. And through various different reasons now, we'll get this back on track because the OCP has to be done by the end of the year. And then naturally that will fill into file into the TMP and the PTMP reviews. So I'm really looking forward to all these coming back together and just getting a common understanding of what these documents are, what they do and what they don't do, so that the developers and the community has a better understanding of how they interconnect eventually to this budget, because those things, once they get built, are down potentially assets that the district has to maintain. So that increases our tax base. If we have more parkland through dedication through these documents, we now need to maintain that parkland with more park staff, et cetera, all of that. So it's all really interconnected, and I'm really looking forward to, especially with Christina here, to help us clarify this messaging of some things that can be very confusing. Last little bit for me is just, to clarify again, this budget is built on many different priorities. First and foremost is community input. I mean, that's the biggest building block of this budget is what did the community say when we were out in engagement? I'm sorry, I read Facebook comments, but I don't make decisions and recommendations to staff or council based on something I've read on Facebook. We based it based on communication that the district receives through emails, through phone calls, through public engagement, various public engagements, through emails and correspondence council receives. That's a big building block. We have staff now that are very open and transparent about getting that information and what we've heard in front of council, so that can help council determine what their priorities are, which are determined through the strategic plan. We also have Sooke priorities and provincial priorities and federal priorities. So all of those things are put into a bucket, and then our lovely finance staff here try and work with the departments and see how much can we get, what can we do? And we always are constantly trying to do more with less. So really, I think the goal for this year, with all of these moving pieces, obviously a by-election, potential other things going on, is we're just trying to stay the course and focus on what's within our control. And right now, that's going to be the OCP and the TMP and the PTMP, and just really get those documents back on track, because I know at least those cause a lot of grief for a lot of people. And I think it's very timely to get this conversation back to the forefront and just get direction from council, because we take direction from council. Staff don't make up the rules. Council gives us the rules, and then we follow along with the rules that council provides us through resolutions and bylaws. But yeah, I'll just leave that there. I'll turn it over to Ms. Christina, who will just start the introduction of the budget here. And just thank you to the council and the community. I know it's difficult. No one likes seeing 16%, and we don't like it either. But we've made the commitment to be transparent and open and honest about where these numbers are coming from, and that's what you're going to get. So difficult decisions will need to be made. We understand that. And so we're looking forward to the conversation. I'll hand it over to Christina.
So thank you. For today's presentation, our finance staff will provide an introduction and overview of the proposed 2025 budget. They'll touch on the challenges, highlights, and changes proposed. They'll provide a comparison to show where Sooke ranks in total general municipal services.
Just sorry, can you just move the mic a little? It's just a little bit harder.
Thank you.
Straining a bit to your story.
Muscle. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Tate. So today we are seeking committee's direction on additional information needed and the requirements for council to support the financial plan bylaw moving forward. If additional financial information is required, we'll do what we can to address some of those questions today. But as COO Gray mentioned, specific service areas that will follow at a February meeting. And with that, I will highlight what we've heard from the community before I hand it back to finance to dive into the numbers. The District of Sooke's, if I can have the next slide, please. The District of Sooke's public engagement process includes 2 phases of engagement. Phase 1, the budget survey and community pop-ups, and Phase 2, a budget open house, the date of which is still to be confirmed for 2025. In the initial phase, more than 1,200 residents participated, and the feedback that we received is reflected in the budget considerations being presented today. Phase 1 engagement ran over 2 months, aligning with the time when taxes are being paid the previous year, which is when the interest in the budget is typically highest. We provide multiple opportunities for participation, include varied days and times, such as evenings and weekends. Additionally, the online survey is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during this 2-month period. Our goal is to ensure that those who want to provide input have an opportunity to do so, and so that they see their feedback reflected in the budget. To recap residents' priorities from this engagement, we heard that the following are areas of greatest importance: community planning, business attraction, retention, and commercial development, parks and green spaces, community safety, and roads and our transportation system network, rather. While community safety and roads remain consistent priorities from previous years, we're seeing a greater emphasis on community planning, business development, and parks and green spaces now than in the past. Next slide, please. A notable portion of our budget is allocated to community organizations through sponsorships, grants, and service agreements. When combined with property tax exemptions, this represents a total investment of approximately $1 million. To ensure we're aligning community priorities, we asked residents whether funding should increase, decrease, or remain the same in this area. The results showed that 58.4% of respondents want funding levels to remain the same, 20.8% support an increase, and 16.8% supported decrease. An additional 4% provided comments, including suggestions for council to reevaluate property tax exemptions. These results are interesting because despite widespread cost pressures, the data reflects a key theme we heard during the engagement. Residents value transparency and a clear connection between the dollars spent and the services delivered. Rather than cutting spending and services, there's a desire to ensure investments are effective and impactful. That said, as CIO Gray already mentioned, starting budget deliberations with a percentage like 16 is not easy. We understand the economic challenges many in the community are facing. We are facing them too. During this presentation, our finance team will break down the proposed investments and show how they align with community priorities. And with that, I will hand it back to Deputy Director of Financial Services, Ben Curry.
Thank you, Mrs. Moog. Okay, I'm going to jump right into it here today. I do have a lot of slides to go through, but I am happy to pause and answer questions at any point throughout if you do want to dive into a certain subject. Otherwise, I'll just keep moving and I'll pause for questions at any time. So the district is facing several pressures in its 2025 budget that are not unique to Sooke, but reflective of trends in other municipalities and sectors. We all notice these pressures in our daily lives, whether at the grocery store, gas station, or elsewhere. At the district level, we experience these challenges on a larger scale. Salaries and wages account for approximately $7.9 million of our budget, while supplies and materials cost $44.5 million and $2.6 million respectively. The economic realities residents are facing are difficult. The budget proposed is conscious of this reality, even though the percent proposed may yield some initial sticker shock. In this budget, inflation pressures affect the cost of goods, services, and labor. Regarding staff resources, the district is bound by collective agreements and staff contracts. Our location with 13 local municipalities within commuting distance requires us to remain competitive and comparable to attract and retain staff. For 2025, QP union members are set to receive a 4% wage increase and a 2.6% increase for exempt staff, which is a CPI adjustment based on the October annual averages for Victoria. Employee benefits are also impacted. For example, rising dental costs directly affect our expenses as our benefit plan is considered administrative services only. So we pay for the actual cost of usage of our health benefits. So we pay, it's called cost plus or an ASO plan. In addition, we have other costs that go up like CPP, so the Canada Pension Plan, and employee and other benefits like the workers' comp or WorkSafe BC as well, which are out of our control. One of the biggest challenges in 2025 budget is managing, upgrading, and rehabilitating the district's aging infrastructure, which depreciates by approximately $3.1 million per year based on the useful life cycle of our assets. The asset management levy helps bridge the funding gap for replacing and maintaining this infrastructure. The $246,000 increase for asset management in the budget today brings the reserve contribution to $464,000, and if continued for 5 years, it will reach $1.7 million by 2029. Community safety pressures on the 2025 budget include an increase for the RCMP contract at ECOM, so the dispatch emergency services, and the continued transition to 24/7 coverage for our fire department. The RCMP costs and ECOM are generally outside of the district's control. The element of this expense that is in our control is the council's determination of the number of officers to serve our community. Specific to ECOM, I'll note that the amount in the 2025 budget is prorated to start on April 2025. So this will include just 3/4 of the expense, and in 2026 we'll have to capture all 4 quarters. So it's 75% of the cost in the 2025 budget. The slide before you here is the summary of all the operating budget requests before you today. So this includes, there's a lot of different lines that change throughout the whole operating budget, and to try to summarize and simplify it for the ease of for discussion and deliberation. So what makes up the 16.04 tax increase or general municipal increase is an RCMP contract increase of 696,000, the ECOM cost, which is the 254,000, 2% for asset management. So this is continued on last year's progress for our asset management plan with an additional 2%, so 246,000. The non-discretional expense changes, is 512,000, and the discretionary expenses 266,000. I'll go into further detail of what's behind each of those lines a little further in the presentation. The estimated impact per average single-family home for this proposed increase is $247 per year, or $20.66 per month. This breaks down to $9.94 per month for the RCMP portion of the increase, or $2.57 for the asset management portion, and $8.14 per month for the district operations. Through plan revisions, staff, we are always looking to find efficiencies and cost-saving opportunities in operations while prioritizing community safety and investment in infrastructure development and eventual asset replacement. So throughout the budget and preparing this, we are looking for all cost savings opportunities. We're averaging expenses. If something has to go down for another line to go up, we're doing that throughout. So it's not as though we're always using the prior year as the benchmark to move up. We're always looking for cost saving opportunities on every line. This slide here is the consolidated revenue proposed. So here we're looking at the revenue that's summarized for in comparison to last year. So you can see the differences. So when we look at the revenue, consolidated revenue over the expenses, that would give the difference of the 16%. So then the summarized changes to the budget would summarize everything that is inside. So this is made, there's thousands of lines that make up, and that become the summary of the next couple slides here. So property taxes, you can see the increase from the prior year. This includes the proposed increase that's before you today. The non-market growth for property taxes. This is the non-market change, so new construction from 2024 to 2025. So that's our little extra bonus and getting extra tax dollars. So we do include that when we're talking about the summary of the tax impact. So we're using part of the increase is offset by this extra revenue that we receive. The 1% utility and grant in lieu of taxes, this line includes the 1% utility amount, which Rachel had mentioned continues to decrease. We do have an increase in this revenue shown here, as there is a grant in lieu of taxes that we receive for provincial government-owned property within the district of Sooke. So we do have a few properties that came on for 2025 from Macola Housing. So not all of the Macola Housing properties were owned by Macola. There's a few that went back to the provincial government, and they're considered BC Housing ownership. So we do receive a grant in lieu for those select properties, and this reflects the increase for the tax revenue from them. Parcel taxes, you see this is the sewer parcel taxes, and we adjust this revenue amount based on the prior year. So each year that we receive growth and new properties are added, we're going to add those properties that received the sewer parcel or sewer generation tax in the year prior. So this is adjusting it to the actual amount that we'll expect to receive using 2024 as the baseline. The fees and charges, the same for this, the sewer generation charges, which is our sewer charge for commercial properties, was just a slight increase from the prior year. So you'll see that reflected here. License and permits, we're adjusting revenue based on actual revenue received. So I believe last year we had made a change to the fees and charges bylaw for property tax reports, which is a report that a lot of real estate agents will pull just to get the history, the building history, and any essentially information related to the property. We just changed the fee to be more in line with the actual cost of the service. So it takes staff a few hours to prepare these reports. So we adjusted the fee. I believe it's $150. And as a result, we bumped the revenue to nearly $20,000 in the year. So that at least we're recovering the actual cost of providing that service. The next line, other sources for operating. This includes different, I believe, transfers from. Sorry, I don't have my note on that. Other sources for capital funding. The 1.5 million is the amount of capital funding from reserve. And sorry, I'll go back to the 2.138 million. I just don't have the detail behind me. The transfers between funds below the 34,000 is just the offset from the community building fund for asset management. Like each year we use that to offset the cost of our GIS software and some of the GIS work that's done that's related to the community building fund. It's been just an opportunity to use that community building fund towards asset management. Transfers from reserves, you see this 226,000 for from the COVID restart reserve. So we are proposing to, this includes the service agreements. So a portion of is the service agreements that were agreed to from council in the prior year that continue into this year. There's an additional amount from the COVID restart reserve that I'll get to a little bit later in the slideshow. Transfer from police reserve, this 150,000 is what we're recommending to offset the increase for the RCMP contract. So we do have approximately 300,000 in the reserve at the end of 2024, and we're suggesting using a portion of this to just keep the increase down by the 150,000. Capital funding, will tie back to later in the presentation. The DCC funds here for the 2.4 million. See there's an increase from the prior year, which is anticipating some larger projects to come through before the end of the year. Actually at the start of this year, so there's some bigger applications we're expecting. So we had done a more detailed breakdown of what we're expecting to come through based on density and number of units that are going to be started. So we're going to get an influx of DCC revenue earlier in this year. And the offset to amortizations, this is a non-cash transaction that has an in the revenue and an out in the expense that essentially measures our cost of depreciation on our tangible capital assets. Sure, if you have a question, go ahead.
Yeah, before we get too far through your worship, I was curious about the amortization offset. I think you mentioned the number $3.1 million of depreciation on our infrastructure per year. I think that's what we're talking about here, yes?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and then I think you mentioned that the 2% was going to produce something like $246,000. And I don't remember the exact amount in 2029, but with a loss or depreciation of 3.1 million until 2029, how does that actually add up? Is it simply enough? Is it skin in the game to get grants? How does that actually, how is that even enough?
It's not, it never, and it won't be. And I think the goal I've had in other municipalities was to get to funding to 50% of your cost of depreciation. And that was our financial goal. So it is a non-cash transaction. So it's not as though this is what we're paying, but this is the calculated amount of what depreciates. So by the book value, so if a road's lifespan is 30 years, and then it takes the cost of the road for $1 million, and then it will divide the cost over those 30 years, and that's the amount of the depreciation for it. So that adds up all of the different assets that we have. And then, of course, you're always going to be able to get more years out of certain assets, like you're going to stretch your roads to 50 or 70 years and just do repairs. And same thing with a vehicle where you may replace a transmission or have a bigger investment to just increase its lifespan. So it It's a measurement that it is a nice goal to get to. If you could get to funding 100% of your depreciation, you're in really good financial shape. Getting half of that is you'd still be in a really good position. So our goal, if we keep at 2%, would move us to 1.7 million. And 2029, that we would be in really good shape as far as having some funds available to replace it, like the aging infrastructure. So we just have to keep at this pace that we're going right now.
Just to reiterate, or what I'm hearing is that $3 million is ambitious and based on basically tables that don't necessarily take into account how long we're going to push our roads and how many Band-Aids we can put on various pieces of infrastructure, make them last just a little bit longer. So it's not actually 3.1 million. It might be closer to 1.5 million or some such. And at that point, this actually is impactful. Yes.
That's true. The 3.1 million is based on an accounting standard for how we are required to essentially report this out. So that's why the value is what it is, where we have essentially rules that we have to follow on how it's calculated. And that's what the auditors reviews each year to ensure that we're adhering to those rules. So that's why the 3.1 million is what it is. But essentially, yeah, the asset management plan that the district is currently following has its own goals in it, and also provides, like, you have to add inflation to that too. So $1.7 million today isn't the same as what it'll be in 2029. Same with not including what it's costing to build road, how that's going up each year. So it's I guess a moving target. So if we have 1.7 million in 2029, that is really great, and it's better than the position we're in today. And we just have to keep adding to it, or we'll just keep falling behind. Okay. Next slide here is the expenses. So I'll go a little bit quicker on this slide here, the consolidated expenses. So this rolls up each of our department expenses. The general government includes departments such as the CAO, HR, communications, finance, IT, and planning and development and building services. It's pretty clear what that includes. You could see the differences from 2024 to 2025. Essentially what's the breakdown of the summary of changes does include all of the changes wrapped up in here. I guess the one major one is that the transfers between reserves, you could see on the transfers to reserve line, this is the amount that goes into the reserve. So it's down to 1.3 million for 2025. So this does provide us essentially what this was there was a capital asset replacement reserve that was rolled into now the asset management reserve last year. So there used to be a transfer to it, which covered the cost of the fire debt. So this is the cost for our fire equipment, fire trucks. And what we've done is just the capital asset replacement reserve transfer no longer exists, and the taxes for that amount just go to funding the fire debt. Because essentially the way that it was working in the budget was that it was going into the reserve in the year, and then it was going out in the same year to pay for the debt. So we're no longer doing that transfer, and the taxes are going straight to covering the fire debt. So here again, you see the DCC funds, the same amount is offset here. So this is really just for reporting purposes. The DCC revenue shown here is the amount we're expecting to come across the counter for existing developments. This is new revenue. The revenue we recognize on the financial statements is actual revenue used for DCC projects. So the accounting standard has us recognizing the revenue at the time when it's received. So this is really just for reporting purposes to say, hey, this is what we're expecting to receive from development this year. So moving into the next slide here. So the next few slides here provides a breakdown of the summary of changes for the budget. So this here is the RCMP and the asset management. So the changes for the RCMP include one, we're suggesting to use 150,000 to offset the increase this year. What makes up some of this larger increase is that last year we council had agreed to borrow, or not borrow, to use 225,000 of the COVID restart reserve to offset the increase. So that brings us today to have to find a funding source for that 225,000. So we can look at I'm suggesting 150 from the RCMP, but at some point we have to move that into taxation so that it's not a going concern. The RCMP contract increase is 621,000. That includes status quo of 14 members. So last year we bumped the funding to approved budget of 14 members. I do have another slide further on just about the breakdown of what that includes for the RCMP increase. But essentially the contract for us to maintain status quo, we have a 621,000 increase just for the RCMP contract alone. In addition, we have the e-com coming on for 2025, starting on April 1st, which is another 254,000, which brings the total to the 951,000. That includes the 150,000 recommendation from the reserve. So total tax increase of 7.72%. And then just below that, the 2% for asset management. These aren't related, but I just combined it on this slide so that I didn't have it on the second slide here. So this next slide here, again, this is a non-discretionary expense changes. So what I've done here, just so that it would be easier to look at, last year, there was a bit of confusion because I had the revenue on top, and I've applied the revenue changes to the non-discretionary expenses so that I could come up with a total tax impact on this for essentially the cost increases that are outside of our control. So you see here the non-market growth for 240,000, the grant in lieu of taxes. This is that change I mentioned for the portion of the provincial housing units at Macola. The COVID restart reserve. So this is 227,000 that we're suggesting is funded from the COVID reserve to offset operations, and an allocation from the admin cost to sewer. So in 2024, we used 13% as the admin cost allocated to sewer. We're recommending to bump it to 15%. So the sewer itself the expenses are 15% of the total operating expenses for the district. So we feel we could justify moving the admin allocation to 15%, which gives us 158,000 essentially offset in some of the expenses in the operating budget for the general fund. And then revenue adjustments equal to 59,000. So the non-discretionary expenses include the municipal by-election for 39,000, the highway maintenance contract for 200,000. So this is, we had gone to tender in the fall of 2024, and the results, we received an increase in our highway maintenance contract with the same contractor. Wage increases per the fire union IAFF contract, 119,000, wage increase per the QP contract. So the IAFF increase was 4.9% for 2023. It was paid in 2024. And then there's just catch up in the 2025 budget to bring everyone's salaries in line with what was approved. The QP received an additional 2.5% in 2024. This is above the allotted 2%. So they went up 4.5% in 2024. And the QP increase for 2025 is 4%, and that's included in the budget for 2025. And the wage increase here on this line is the catch up between both years. There's a part-time bylaw officer, which was funded by COVID in 2024. So this 48,000 we're recommending is moved over to taxes. So when it was funded by COVID, we need to figure out another funding source to keep it ongoing. The wage increase per the exempt contract, 168,000. So the exempt staff receive a 2.6% increase to their standard salaries. In addition, there was some catch up in some of the salaries that had been, so if new staff come on and the salaries are different from the original budgeted amount, this would play the catch up for that. This is the council's CPI increase. I believe I estimated this at 3%, but it'll probably be a little bit lower than that. It's based on the December results for the annual averages for Victoria CPI. Executive office coordinator position, 106,000. This includes benefits. Firefighter 7 hired in June 2024. So this is a firefighter that was hired last year. This is just catching up the wages for that firefighter as we didn't budget for the 100% last year. Group benefits, WCB, EI, and CPP increases. So this brings us to 138,000 to bring us in line with those amounts. Software licensing, 32,000, and insurance premiums are expected to go up 5% this year. I'll just pause here if anyone has any questions about any non-discretionary expenses.
Go ahead, Councillor McMahon.
For the municipal by-election, is that for a single by-election or is that for two?
That's correct. That's for one election.
Okay, and is there any reason why we're not budgeting for two?
At this point, I was only asked to put one in, so I might refer that to Mrs. Gray.
Sure. I think January 27th is when we're anticipating getting direction from council on the timing of a potential by-election for 2025 here. So right now we know of one by-election, so that's all been budgeted. And we're waiting for council direction on, we're budgeting for one election right now, I guess, because that's what we know. So that's why we have not included two by-elections this year. At council direction, we can bump up that funding or whatever. We're hoping to have a more fulsome conversation with council at the January 27th meeting to confirm council's desire for the timing of this by-election, because that will impact other pieces. And of course, nobody knows what's going to happen with the federal election, so that's the unknown at this point. And budgets being as tight as they are, to leave an additional, $39,000 in that budget to run two elections was just something staff didn't include at this time.
Councillor Pearson.
Yes, to the chair, to CAO. So with by-elections, do we only budget for every 4 years? So every 4 years we have an increase, or do we have a reserve fund?
We don't, it's through your worship to Councillor Pearson. We don't have a reserve fund, and that's something that's actually we just were talking about is historically, it's just been funded every 4 years or 3 years back in the day when in the election year, and then I guess risk manage in the out years. But that is the conversation we literally just had was going, maybe this is something similar to we talked about this a few years ago and just budget pressures everywhere with the bigger transportation plans, OCPs and all that is having a reserve fund to start saving for those too that we know will need replacement. So elections are a lot cheaper, and that's something that we were talking about is maybe providing council with some options of this is just maybe an annual thing versus the every 4 year budget pressure.
Councillor St. Pierre.
For your worship to staff, I'm just curious about the allocated admin cost to the sewer. I was wondering if that particular methodology is used for everything. So is it the case that if 15% of the activity for the planning department is it the same everywhere? Is that used across the board?
It's not used across the board just because the two funds are separate. So the general fund considers everything general operations, and then the sewer fund is kept very separate, and it's its own, like the sewer fees cover the cost of operating sewer, and it's kind of like a separate business, and we have to treat it as so we can't cross the two over. And then this is the one opportunity that we have to, like, for the sewer essentially to pay a portion of us over here. So it includes HR, finance oversight, IT coverage. So that's the chance for us to have that the transfer between the two. So that doesn't work the same because the rest is under the same umbrella for general.
All right, through your worship, just to clarify, so basically all the support, admin support that is required for the sewer operations to continue working is shared costs that's carried entirely in this building, say, as opposed to over there. And the 15% is basically to defray, if they were actually a completely separate business, it obviously would cost more to have all the services, correct?
Yeah, likely it would. For it could cost more.
I was just concerned about whether or not it was an equitable approach. That's all. And it seems like it is. Thank you.
It is. I've seen anything from 13, 12 to 17 and 20. So it's in the range of what other municipalities are doing. Okay, the next slide here. This brings us to the discretionary expenses. So this is essentially expenses in the budget that have been deemed essential for operations but are not mandatory. So these are the asks from the district. So the first one here is the firefighter 8 wages benefits for an April start of 111,000. This continues our plan going to 24/7 coverage. The next line here is the parks labor. This gives us the option to add an FTE to our parks team for 38,000. We're using some of the existing auxiliary hours to bump that up. And so we're using some of our own budget. That's not the cost of a full-time parks person. We're just being creative with some of the resources we have to try to stretch that out and provide a full-time position instead of just having only the 4 auxiliary on call, not on call, but 4 essentially part-time staff. Senior auxiliary for financial accountant, and then a auxiliary clerk support. The financial accountant is the finance department has asked for a full-time accounting support for a couple of years now, and it just never makes it essentially even to like the draft budget. So trying to get a little bit further by getting some extra support. And this helps us get there. So if we add a little bit each year, perhaps in a couple of years, we'll have enough for a full-time equivalent staff. And the second line here is an auxiliary support clerk, which is just building on the 10,000 we had last year. So this person provides clerical support for all the clerks. So we have the clerks cover each other off when someone's away on vacation or on leave. And this allows us to do so and keep service levels the same. The next one here is miscellaneous fire operating expenses. And just this is a combination of a few changes they've asked for in their operating budget. Corporate training and education is $10,000 requested from HR just to kind of move forward in doing a full organizational corporate training plan. This moves in that direction and allows us to have some options to consider some more group organization training. JS ortho photos, this comes along every 2 years. Another one of those items, just like the election, that we're going to try to do a budget for regularly so that we're putting aside the money. So every 2 years, we're in a partnership with the CRD and we contribute to the ortho photos being updated. So we're scheduled in 2025 to have those photos updated again. Engineering consultants for grant applications. This request came from Mr. Carter, just in support of having some recent grant applications that came through from the province and from the federal government recently. Street maintenance, parks materials and supplies, parks vehicle maintenance, and parks irrigation. I just added these smaller items here just to kind of show what smaller changes we're making. And this is just to bring it in line with the actual expenses. If we didn't get these increases, we would just risk manage each of these line items. There's not a lot that we're asking for here. The parks irrigation line for 11,000, I just wanted to show and talk about is each time we add a new development and say we bring on a new boulevard for maintenance, one, it's an extra bit of space that our parks team has to maintain. And also you'll see irrigation go in on these, and that irrigation water bill comes to us when we become responsible for maintaining the irrigation and then also paying for the water bill. So you'll see on Church Road right now beside the Wadhams Farm on the street front, they have the irrigation installed and it's still exposed. But once that comes on and the grass is green, it's like we're paying the bill for that water. So each time we accept a new development, that's another cost that we're passing on to the tax base. So that is my summary of the non-discretionary and the discretionary expenses. I'm going to just take a moment to pause for any questions and then I'll continue on.
So if Councillor Bateman, then McMouth.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Curry. At the service review back in November, in terms of desired full-time employees by the district, I think there was a senior financial accountant as a one full-time employee, and I see you've come in as an auxiliary. we also heard about the chief building official position. I don't see that on your list, a planner 2 position. And there was also a facility laborer as differentiated from the parks labor.
So yeah, yes, those are there. The chief building inspector still remains in budget as funded. So that was posted recently. We never, that funding was always there. So that doesn't come forward as a new request. It's just a position that hadn't been hired for, and we had a part-time solution. The financial accountant is one, once I get to it, I realize it's just not reasonable in this budget. Once we reach the point of 16%, I started with the budget at 18.9%. So at that point, we just say we're just going to have to do without this for another year. And getting by with some part-time hours would be helpful. We're just lucky we're in a position right now where we have a person who has helped me in the last year while Rachel had stepped up and was wearing all the hats of the senior leadership team. And this person is a deputy finance manager from another local municipality who's taken some time to be at home with her kids, and she wants part-time work. So I've just been really lucky to have someone who's I could just give things the odd time to keep work flowing, and she's been really resourceful. Sorry, well, in the planner too, again, it just didn't make the final cut at the end. We just realized there wasn't any room. And it just gets down to that. And with the, again, with the parks facilities person, it came down to what we could do with budget we had in front of us, and decided to go with the parks labor because it was more possible.
Okay, thanks. Councillor McMath.
So just for clarity, so the 21,000, the 10,000, that's for basically consulting. And then after 8 years, you're gonna get a full-time position.
They're not consulting, they're auxiliary positions. So they're the clerk auxiliary position is in the union, and the senior financial accountant is an auxiliary exempt position. That's how we originally had worded, and is considered an employee of the district, but have been talking about moving it in to be a union position. So we're just beginning that process now to make it a union position, because that's the route it would go once it becomes a full-time position.
And how long do you anticipate until it becomes that?
Well, it really depends on how the next year looks, and if there's room, we'll ask for it again. So it depends on what other cost pressures we're facing. So depending on what happens with ecom, what happens with VIMQ, and how fast do you want to grow the police? So there's other elements that we know we'll just have to pause and wait and see what happens with the 2026 budget as we get closer through this year, closer to the end of the year.
And the miscellaneous fire operating expenses, can you give me some examples?
Sure. Sorry, I should have listed that one as well. I kind of realized it afterwards that we summarized one and we detailed the other one. It wasn't at all intentional. I just wanted to talk about the irrigation.
As Mr. Curry's looking that up, I can just kind of touch on the staffing piece a bit and how this kind of happens. So what happens on a regular basis as we start the internal budget process based on the surveys, et cetera, all the departments send Ms. Holder our wish list, their wish list of staffing positions, and then basically, we sit down with the finance team, myself and Catherine and Rose and Ben here sit down together, and we basically crunch the numbers and go, what was council's priorities? And they said 24/7 coverage for RCMP and police, or RCMP and fire were the priority. So we find the funding for those positions first, and then process of elimination, try and figure out where we can get the best bang for our buck. And in ways, hence, the executive office coordinator moved to the top of the queue, because that provides admin support dedicated support for the CAO, the mayor, HR, which other staff have been doing that work on the side of their desks. And so then that frees up that staff's time to then provide support to Ms. Scott, our Community Economic Development Officer, as well as Christina, our Manager of Communications here. So like we're trying to use every resource we can to the maximum capacity and use these resources in the best way possible. And, you know, a corporate services assistant providing a bit of off the side of their desk support to the mayor and CAO was just not the best use of their time. Their time is better spent with events and community things that they're already involved with anyway. So it's always a balancing act. Obviously finance is dear to my heart. I would love to support that position and put it in front of you. But as Mr. Curry says, it's not realistic. We're trying to be realistic and find the balance. And right now the short term is all these departments are trying to do without and do more with less so that the RCMP and fire can get their big staffing asks implemented, because those are our biggest part of our budget. And then hopefully in the next couple of years here, the rest of us can have a position or two and fill it up. And hence, again, with the creative accounting we try and do with our auxiliary budget for the parks laborer, we did that a few years ago where we reduced the auxiliary parks budget and then transferred some of that to the full-time employees so that we could get these full-time employees locked in. Because parks and maintaining the parks is what we heard from the community is important to them. And as we get more, you only have so many people and it's becoming more challenging. At the detailed budget conversation in February here, I'll make sure Catherine Ms. Holder can speak to this. It's becoming harder to find people who want to work just auxiliary part-time, like they want full-time with benefits and all that. So that's why we're trying to be creative with any of these, you know, the auxiliary labor budgets to, as we can fund to get these permanent people, because then they're working all year long and not laid off, you know, in the winter and all of that. So it's always a balancing game. And right now for the last few years, it's just the municipal departments are trying to do more with less as much as possible to get those big pressures from the RCMP and fire covered off. And then that's why, you know, ECOM and VIMQ pressures coming on too is just crippling us. Like, as you see, right, we're barely over $100,000 for 1%. So it just adds up so fast. So, you know, we're trying. I appreciate maybe people always think we should do less, do even more with even less. And we're trying, and that's why we're seeking your direction. But sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So the impact for the fire department changes there is turnout gear and then equipment maintenance. So it's 10,000 for turnout gear. They've asked for that actually for 2 years in a row, and we kind of had them risk manage it last year and we didn't put it in budget, but then this year it's in there. I think just with them adding new staff and with the last invoice I'd seen, I think turnout gear was costing 5,000 per person. So it's like just the aging equipment and having the ability to replace those when needed. Just the fire department does do a really good job at they provide a lot of minuses saying, hey, we're going to bump this budget, but we're reducing this budget, and their whole budget is like that. And I know one area of savings that we've seen and have closely been watching is just their overtime with them moving to the 24/7 service. Like their overtime last year was under 10,000 compared to 70,000 the year in 2023. So that's at least we know there is some other savings there that are happening with them moving to this coverage. Is there any other questions on the discretionary expenses?
No, but go ahead, Councillor Bateman, and then I thought it would be just a good place to pause on this section to see if members of the public had any questions before we move on to the others, because it might be a lot to save those questions till the end, but I'll go to Councillor Bateman first.
Okay, so back to the service review, and I think another thing I believe I heard was 2 new firefighters in 2025. And I see we have a firefighter 8, but not a 9.
I'm assuming it's the same rationale, just given
Yeah.
where the numbers are coming in.
Okay, it's important to note that.
Yeah.
And I believe the fire department is seeking 16 firefighters in due course over time. So we'll keep seeing that line item. And in terms of the policing, I think we are budgeted for 18 approved positions in 2025, and we're currently paying 14 municipal officers.
Yeah, that's coming up on a future slide.
Is it coming up
Yeah,
on a
so-
future slide? Okay, I'll withdraw my musings.
Okay, Just hold there. Counselor Beddoes, and then I'll go to the public.
I just want a quick comment, how much I appreciated, Mr. Curry giving an explanation, that Councilor Bateman asked about the previous, funding for positions, and, if they hadn't looked at it hard, it'd been 18%. So I guess to me, it, demonstrates that staff is looking hard. They understand that we're in a very tough position, and I just appreciate it. Thanks for that, clients.
Okay, I'll just pause here and just look, we do have members of the public here with us tonight or today. Thank you for joining us, and just welcome to the microphone, please. And if you could please turn it on and introduce yourself, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello, there's too many questions to ask, but start with, I just want to say one thing when we do the,
Sorry, Ms.
Questions
Lewis,
for
can you
this-
reintroduce yourself?
sorry,
Can you introduce yourself, Ms. Lewis?
do I have a which?
Introduce yourself.
Or introduce myself. Oh, Ellen Lewis. When we're doing the stats for the community, I would suggest that we have children's stats separate because they're not paying the taxes. That's just my thought. We can have, it's good for have their opinions, but let's not book them in with we who pay the taxes. For more parkland, I have a question with that, with parkland. We've talked about it before. We're always looking for community gardens. So instead of more parkland, because more parkland means more park staff, why not put in community gardens? And community gardens, the water be paid for by the community gardens people. And it's something that we've discussed many times. Instead of more parks, put in more gardens, more community gardens, and they'll pay for themselves. I'm always looking ways to cut expenditures because I'm a farmer and that's what we have to do in order to survive. I have a question also about the aging infrastructure. Are we focusing on sewers, water, roads? What's the aging infrastructure that we're looking at mostly?
Okay, it wouldn't be water. That would be a capital regional district expense, but I'll ask staff for a bit more about that, please.
Sure, it's coming. We're gonna talk capital in a few slides here, and Rose has a breakdown of just the different areas. So how much is going to sewer, roads, and parks. So she has a nice little graph that shows you how it's allocated. Some of it's like new infrastructure, but not just aging. So it's a little bit of both.
And something in here too, you mentioned about budget for bridge repairs. What bridge were you talking about?
I think that's also coming, just looking ahead.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah,
We haven't
it's-
talked about it yet. Okay.
It's.
I hope
coming,
you talk about
believe.
it, which one it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. With the provincial property that we get monies from, does that include the provincial highway?
It does not, no,
No, it does not.
no, not,
So we don't get money for
not
that.
land under roads, doesn't
Yeah,
count.
I know. I'm just being cheeky. Okay. I've asked why not. With the e-com, is there any way of pushing back with that e-com business?
We've been doing that since we got notice of this in 2020, I think, is when the first letter arrived. And it's an ongoing advocacy file, and all the South Island mayors that are, or South Island communities impacted, so it's only our CMP jurisdictions. But not Machosen now, I believe, but not the Highlands, but not municipally run police services, and only on the South Island. So there has been letters going out every single time on this. It's been ongoing, and it's not
Okay,
working. Well, the advocacy doesn't seem to be. Thank you. It's falling on deaf ears, and
yeah.
it's
Well,
not landing.
I guess you need to get the community involved. That's what we're here for. And with the transportation master plan, I just wanted to say, and Parks and Trails plan, we really need to have public communication with that. It's not happened in the past when the Parks and Trails master plans come together. There's not an open public meetings for people to express. And there's a lot of people with a very good ideas all over the community. And we need to engage those people because we have to be creative in how we deal with this because this is a serious issue. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lures. Stay tuned for more and there'll be more question opportunities or opportunities. Yeah, please come forward.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, James Holloway. First of all, thanks, everybody. I can see a lot of complexity and hard work behind this and appreciate that. And as one of the counselors mentioned, people really scouring to look for savings and whatnot. And it's my first time to attend a meeting like this, so I have what might be a kind of naive question. But you mentioned like increased costs, when you put in a new development and ultimately you're going to have to pay for the boulevard and the water and whatnot. I do see a lot of development in the Sooke area, so these rising costs that we see here, how are they not, I probably missed it, but you must be increasing your tax base as well. And so that's already reflected in the income and it's not covering all the rising costs?
Sure, I can answer that. So when I mentioned non-market growth, that's the new construction growth. So on this slide here, you can see the line that says non-market growth from property taxes. That's the value we receive from the new construction, which is not considered in this when we talk about the tax increase, but that's the supplemental revenue we receive from the growth. So that does apply typically to the non-discretionary expenses. So just the cost of us operating and continuing operating. So we do get a bump when there is new buildings completed. BC Assessment will provide the assessment and we usually get the value to what's been constructed at October 31st. And we'll get an update and that will be what forms the non-market growth. We get those reports in the fall and we'll know approximately what that'll be each year. So it's the new construction taxes that we receive. You'll see it commonly referred to from municipalities as non-market growth. So any of the adjustments made from BC Assessment, not from the market. So
Okay, and does that get reflected as people then move into the new construction, then you anticipate further income increases in following years?
Not related to income, just purely talking about property taxes. So this is just on what we receive from the value, the assessment value from the new building being located there. So when the Wadhams Farm, each additional unit that they add there and is completed, will receive the tax dollars for them in the following year.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just going to share, just build on that example that infrastructure has already gone in, but the units are still under construction. So when they were assessed, they could still just be bare land because the houses have not been built. But then that's where there's a bit of a lag. So then as the houses are constructed, the assessment value changes. However, as we have more households, we get more calls for service at the same time. So then as we grow, everything else grows at the same time with calls to bylaw, policing, fire, all of that, and the population grows. So you see where that goes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
that makes sense. Thank you very much for the question. I was just turning off the microphone. Okay, it just makes that sound. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Curry.
Okay, that leads to this next slide here. So we've talked about the proposed changes a couple times now. The potential 16.04% property tax increase. This is the increase to the general municipal taxes. So this doesn't equal 16% per household. It really is just, we're talking about an increase to the general municipal tax amount. So that total amount of last year was 12,324,000. We're increasing that by 16.04%. So that does apply differently to each house. So depending on where everyone's assessment value lands, if you're within the average, you should receive the average increase, which is the 16.04%. But if you're below, so if your assessment dropped more than the average, you wouldn't exactly see 16%. You'll receive less than the 16%. But again, if your assessment was above the average, which would be above the 1% decrease, then you would essentially be paying a little bit more than the 16%. So it's not always exact, and that's why we use these average amounts, and we use the average value of a house. So it's not exact to each house. That's what we just want to keep saying throughout the process. And we are just talking about the increase to the total amount that we're collecting for the 16%. So overall, that increase, when you include the non-market growth, that would be $2,217,401 to add it to the total district general operations. So the estimated impact per average single-family home is $20.66 per month, or $247 per year for the average home value that's valued at $770,000. So the residential assessments in Sooke have decreased for 2025 by 1.09%. So that's gone from 778,000 to 770,000 for 2025. Comparing that to 2024, so actually not comparing that, this is separate. So from 2024, 83.4% of our taxes were paid by the residential tax base, and 14.46 were paid by the business class.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So from 2024, 83.4% of our taxes were paid by the residential tax base, and 14.46 by the business class. So then just comparing that to the distribution in the assessment class. So this is how our assessment totals are distributed. We have 94% of our properties are residential by BC assessment, and 4.3% are business class. So you can just see how the ratios are not quite exact, as though we have 94% residential properties here in Sooke, 4.3 business. Any questions about that slide? I'm going to jump to the RCMP budget next, so we're just changing topics. Okay, the RCMP budget. So we receive an email which confirms that the cost per member will increase from 227,000 to 254,000. This increase includes 385,000 for personnel. Inside that amount includes wages, equipment, and a new vehicle. It's spread out across the it's not as though each member costs 254,000. It's considered like an overhead to each personnel. The guard is 27,000 increase from the prior year, and accommodation, which is essentially the cost of the property, and is going up by $3,700. So, and then there's a little bit of a difference of a catch up because the RCMP fiscal year doesn't coincide with ours. So their year end is March 31st. So usually the first quarter of every year is a little bit less. So just for example, for 2024's budget for setting the RCMP budget, we used the first quarter of 2024, which is the last quarter of the RCMP. We budgeted based on the amount we expected to receive on the invoice. So typically it would have been like, say, 800,000 per quarter, but we had talked to the RCMP. They said it should be approximately 650,000. So then we budgeted for the true amount instead of the higher amount. So we had less of an increase to do last year. And then as a result of that, this year we're playing catch up again. So the increase is a little bit bigger this year based on that. So this year, the RCMP, there isn't a lot of room they're almost at, I think they have 12 of the 14, and there isn't a lot of room to budget less for the first quarter. So we're budgeting for the full amount of what they've requested for. So the original plan in the 5-year financial plan from last year was to try to fund 15 members this year. It still is an option for council if you would like us to consider adding a 15th member. At this point, we're just presenting the budget with 14, just with trying to manage what's in front of us today at the increases that are here. So We'll have to play catch up in a couple of years if we're going to continue moving forward with the 24/7 police coverage. But for now, 14 seem more palatable for the budget numbers, and also with ecom coming on of the $250,000 cost. Is there any questions about the RCMP budget?
It's a question for possibly our mayor. It doesn't matter who answers. I'm curious. It has to do with ecom and the way that it was presented to us. Are there analogous downloads of costs? I mean, this is basically a service that you can't actually avoid getting. You get it with your phone, and it's basically across BC, across Canada, across North America. It was previously not paid, I believe, in this particular way at a local government level. Is this in any way, shape, or form normal? And what is to prevent more of this from happening? If it's not, I'm curious about this because the way it's been presented and the way that the service is deployed doesn't really speak to it being a local government cost at all. So I'm just wondering about that.
So I'll give you just my mayor opinion on this. In 2012, we were one of many that signed a long-term agreement with the RCMP. And a number of municipalities or local governments worked together into that agreement, which I believe spans 20 some years. And that provided cost and certainty over the years, but it allowed us to plan as we grow. We knew about the transition in our census data that as we grow, we pay more. When we cross over the 15,000, we budget for that and so forth. And then we were also aware of not being a part of the Vancouver Island Major Crime Unit. So that was another piece of concern. So it was in I believe it was 2020, we received a letter saying that there's a meeting that's being formed and we feel that you should pay this. Local governments should be responsible for this. So this, and then we realized, but wait a second, it's not, is this a UBCM piece? So we reached out and no, because it didn't go to all local governments in the province. It was only the South Island. So not the North Island, just the South Island. And that's where at AVIC or UBCM, we like, are you paying this and who's paying this, right? And then around Greater Victoria, it's where I mentioned back earlier, it doesn't impact Victoria or Saanich or Oak Bay or Central Saanich because they have their own municipal police force. So it's specific to RCMP only. And then what is the amount? So then it took time, and under what rationale are we having to pay this now? And then it just went back and forth. And I believe it was our interim CAO, Brett Blackhall, that took it up and said it was under the definitions municipal unit police cost. And someone, I don't know who, we don't know who, looked at it and felt, oh, well, we shouldn't have to pay this. Local governments can. So that's been the pushback with the mayor's demanding information. So then it was the case, is it $10,000? Like, what is the cost impact? I don't like $10,000, but we couldn't get an answer as to how much the bill is. And then it was approximate, put it in writing, because if we're going to have to pay this, we need to know what it is. And now it's 2025, and now we know the numbers. And then we have written to the Solicitor General. We've been at UBCM meeting with the Solicitor General saying we just simply can't afford this, particularly because we are growing and the costs are growing. And you can't make decisions without those that pay at the table. So you need to absorb this. So then they absorbed it for a while, and now they've come back again saying, no, you need to pay this and you need to prorate it starting in April of this year and fully the years beyond. And so I've just signed off on another letter because then in 2024, the mayor's changed. So the mayor of North Cowichan now has picked up the file and is pushing back, and the cost varies across the table. So, you know, Langford shared with me that they're close to a $2 million hit. They're a much bigger population. So even how it's calculated it's still confusing. Ms. Gray might have a bit more, because then everyone's been on the call together that this is the cost of adding to our complement. Now we're having to make a choice here, and the service levels remain the same. And then you may be aware at UBCM, we've said, okay, well, can you not then look at a levy on cell phones? So there's a levy on landlines to pay for 911, but now as that revenue is going down because folks are transitioning to cell service instead of landlines. And that is not moved either. And then arguably I've said, well, cannabis is now legal and there's taxation on that. So flow some of that taxes to offset some of the policing costs. And that's been another, but that doesn't seem to go anywhere because they argue that all the costs with legalization, they need all of that. But arguably our police and our CMP had to deal with cannabis as an illegal substance, busting grow ops or whatever. Like that was all fall under that jurisdiction. And now it's legal. It's a bit different. So we're still just stuck. And now it's like talking to a wall. There's just no answer. I get a random, thank you very much for your letter. Please pay your bill. Maybe not please, but here's your invoice. It's probably more what it reads like. Does that make sense? So no, it doesn't seem normal to me. And then there's other costs that may come our way. I mean, some of it we're aware of, unionization. We're aware that there could be retro. That's another cost that comes our way. We're aware that at the federal government table, body-worn cameras, all the software and hardware along with that will be coming our way if it hasn't already as a cost of doing business. So these decisions are being made, but the ones paying it are not at the table. So then it just lands. And I've raised it with we have all of us with our 3 MLAs now that have served this area, the solicitor generals that have been in place, different levels at the staff level. But again, it just seems like, why just the South Island? Why not the North? Why not across BC? There is no answer to that.
So I'm going to try and make this brief because so right now, for example, we collect taxes for the CRD, for the libraries and so on and so forth. We have an understanding in that particular case, there's a system in place. This feels like police services, we're being forced to increase our taxes because of police services where literally there's no representation. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, it's not police, it's 911, but
that was a further question.
The other part I'll add, and thank you for raising the CRD, is and Councillor McMath might be able to answer this a bit better than me, but like our dispatch for fire, for example, was handled through Langford. Like when I think the calls come in and they go out, and then Langford had our 911 handled the fire calls. And then their equipment, as I understand it, didn't meet whatever the current level was. So that is a service to us through the Capital Regional District. So there's a handful of us, including the one, Fuka, and View Royal, maybe. I can't remember which ones. But in that case, there was a fair bidding process of where that should go. So some municipalities chose to go to Surrey for fire dispatch. And then Sooke through the CRD and the others that are party of that have gone to Saanich Fire because their equipment is at the level to meet that. So that's where it's just kind of interesting when you call there, some jurisdictions bouncing to Surrey and back. But it made sense for that to be local here because local people know the area, arguably. So in that case, though, there was a fair bidding process. This one doesn't have that. And if we were going to spend this amount of money, we wouldn't just direct award it. When you look at the process we go and what our staff do when we're getting bids and the pricing, this one doesn't even have that. It's just someone somewhere has decided this is where it's going to be and this is what you're going to pay. If that makes, I'm probably adding more confusion, but I just thought I would add that. And it's a difference in how we procure services.
Well, I'm more informed and more confused, and I can imagine the public feels the same. That's good.
Councillor McMath.
So how it kind of works is Ecom 911 answers like 98% of the 911 phone calls in BC. The majority of those, there's an Ecom on the mainland. And so those are called queue operators. So when you call, they're going to ask you, do you need police, ambulance, or fire, and for what municipality? And then they're going to direct your call. BC Ambulance Provincial Service, so they have communication centers throughout, but anyone at any time in those communication centers can answer for anywhere in the province. So if there's a big event and every BC Ambulance dispatcher is taking a 911 phone call, it'll bounce to the next closest BC Ambulance Communication Center and they'll take it and put the call up. Police and fire are different. So as the mayor was saying, originally Langford dispatched for the CRD clients. And the infrastructure that she's talking about is called Next Gen 911 infrastructure, which is a mandated infrastructure upgrade that everyone has to complete. And there's a major price tag that comes with that. So when Victoria Fire and Langford, who was overseeing those CRD clients, they never set money aside for that. So they closed their centers and then it went to a bidding. Langford decided to go with Surrey and the rest of the CRD clients, which are from Renfrew, Otter Point, Shirley, Machosen, East Sooke, Highlands, Willis Point, Central Saanich, Oak Bay, and then the Gulf Islands. They're all dispatched out of Saanich, so it gets like confusing because you're like, where am I going? Things like that. And I was going somewhere with this, but I totally forgot because I'm explaining how it all works. Oh, so there is an e-com on the island that is, they take police calls for everything south of Ladysmith. So one of my clarifying questions, because I can't remember anymore, this $250,000 ask from Ecom 911, where is it going exactly?
I'm pointing, it's going to the mainland.
Okay, so that this is specifically solely basically for answering the 911s. It is not to do with the call taking and dispatching that happens on the island.
That's my understanding. It's that initial 911 and it's part of that e-com and it's on the mainland. So then there was, and I have to, it's getting confusing as the time passes and it gets complex. But that's where there was concern that we don't even have representation there.
Yeah, 100%. Also,
Yeah.
it's like such a massive cost, which sounds like poor budgeting in the early days. I'll just, yeah, go ahead.
No, just thinking.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I was just trying to open the letter, but it won't open now. I don't know why. Okay. Well, here's the letter. I'll just read it out. It's not too long. I'll just read the gist of it, but it is a letter that went out. Or actually, it's still going out. It's being drafted, but it's just bringing everyone up. I think the intention is now that the new cabinet is formed, that's what we were waiting for, was the minister. And then it's again going over the problem statement. But there's no discussion during this period of time around changes to the funding model. And it just goes on. So this is coming, so I probably shouldn't read it yet because it's just still being finalized on, and then there's a request on it because we're all trying to finalize this. So it impacts Colwood, Duncan, Ladysmith, Langford, Machosen, North Cowichan, North Saanich, Sydney, Sooke, and View Royal. We're the only ones impacted in the whole province. So yeah, we feel singled out. And it's a download. You have anything to add, Ms. Gray? Some of the more technical stuff, I think you understand better than me. And then our arguing is they've not consulted with us. It's just been letters. There's no alternative funding. It's inequitable. And again, what about the levy that other provinces have implemented? And that's the cell phone levy. And it goes back to the UBCM asked that could help offset it because of the disappearance of landlines or fading away of landlines.
Yeah, not much to add to what Mayor Tate and Councillor McMath was explaining from the staff perspective. Mayor Tate gave the good synopsis of kind of how we got here. My understanding is that Green Timbers building getting built financially behind the scenes with the police agreement messed things up. Somebody messed up way back in the day with the funding sources for that. And then now finally someone caught on to it and was like, actually, technically our federal agreement says that means we don't have to pay for this bill anymore because we don't pay third parties. And this organization is a third party versus how it was being invoiced and paid for before. So basically, yeah, a while ago, we just got sent an agreement saying, sign this agreement and send it back to Mayor Tate. That's not how we procure goods, especially for something well over $300,000 a year. Appreciate there's not a lot of competition. So then ever since then, we've just been working with council and the other communities on advocacy for this, helping understand. And one of the bigger concerns besides the cost of this is, as Mayor stated and Councillor McMath is saying, like, we have no representation. We're just supposed to pay this bill and hope that e-com is going to sort their stuff out and provide good service. So yeah, there's not much more to add from the staff's perspective, other than we acknowledge that this is a big problem and this is something that we shouldn't have to pay. And we're budgeting it because all the other munis kind of agree that technically we need to put a line in the budget for this. And if we start getting invoiced, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, if we actually pay those invoices, and go from there. So,
Councillor.
yeah, I am asking right now, we're obviously letting this letter writing campaign carry on here, and the continued advocacy. Once we get a final answer back from the province, or just start getting sent bills, I am confirming, like, what happens if we don't pay it? What are you going to do? What are you going to pull from us? Nothing. You don't give us anything.
That's my exact
respectfully.
question.
So it's not like they give us funding that they can pull back, the RCMP. They or e-com. Sorry, I don't want to just slag the RCMP, but they're just
totally separate.
grouped together.
Yeah.
They're separate. I appreciate that. So it's kind of a bit of a holding pattern, wait and see, but in alignment with the other municipalities, we're reporting it on our financial plan, similar to the other munis, just to show we're united in this, and what a massive hit it is to our budgets. To Langford's, I've heard that $1 million number from quite a while ago. Like, that's a huge hit. So more to come.
So should we have it as an item on here if we're not going to pay it?
Well, the issue, I guess, that's the debate. Other munis, and Ms. Rose can speak to this a little bit more potentially too, is, they've talked, they've agreed, this is how they're presenting it. The issue is if we get legally required to pay this, how are we going to come up with that funding? Coming up with $300,000, we don't just have contingency funds sitting here with $300,000 to come up with that funding. So that's why we're trying to find the balance of, that's the prorated amount from April that we've been given to include in the budget. And that's the risk, I guess, is if we don't budget for it and allocate any funding, and if by the end of the year we're being forced to pay this bill, then we'll have to find other revenue sources to pay that invoice.
How would they force?
Sure.
Are we
Thank
freaking
you.
you out?
And thank you. CAO Gray has tasked me to looking into some of the details of this. And a report will be coming to answer these questions in camera, because they are going to include legal opinions based on some of the good questions that you have. What I might allude to, though, is it is, echoing Ms. Gray's perspective that it is financially prudent to include these costs into the budget. What council might want to consider is, without this service, the cost of creating your own service might surmount the amount that we are allocating for this year. And it is also worthy to note that the costs included in the proposed e-com agreement are just for this year, and e-com would be looking at a separate agreement potentially in years to come out. So this would be a short-term agreement just to get to the end of 2025. So more to come in the next meeting or two. That we will have a comprehensive e-com report before the financial plan is adopted.
Because I appreciate what you're saying, where, it's going to be more expensive to create our own center, but are they actually going to turn the lights off to the house? I don't think it would go very well. I lost it. I'll come back.
Councillor St. Pierre.
Just a further clarification question, through your worship, to staff, and I think to Ms. Bagnall, actually. I'm curious about the 246,000 this year, but not necessarily for next year. That makes it sound like it could be more, it could be less. It sounds to me like there's been some mismanagement, and therefore it's more this year, and we're hoping for less next. Could there be some clarification around that?
No, I mean, this is a partial year. This is April to December. So even if it remains at the current, let's say whatever the rate is, it'll be more next year, because this is only April to December. Councillor Beddoes.
Your worship, we're going to get a comprehensive report in the next short while in camera for reasons, and then we can talk about it more in depth then. We're just going around in circles now. We know it's a hardship on us and we're not happy about it. The public's not happy about it. So until we get that report, it's only prudent to at least put it in the budget for now until we know. So let's just wait.
One more from Councillor McMath and Councillor Bateman.
Can we invite Ecom to come speak to it, like, well, as we go through these budget meetings?
Yep, I think we can do that as a motion arising at some point at the end. Yep. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at a slide that Staff Sergeant Wilcox presented to us, and the other wild card is VIMQ expansion. As he says, the implementation date is TBD. The initial estimated cost is approximately $350,000 per year. So I guess the question then becomes, do we budget for that as well? How is the reserve fund sitting at the moment?
Through your worship, for 2025, just with all the unknowns, again, in the balancing of risks and tax increases of knowns versus guesstimates, that one seems way further out from us actually receiving a bill than Ecom. So that's why in the options, initially first round, we had them both in, and obviously you can see what that would have done to the budget, another $350,000 for VIMQ. When we know realistically, the likelihood of us being invoiced by that by the end of 2025 is almost nil, because the province is committed to going back and re-engaging with these other communities. While Sooke, I think, is fully aware of VIMQ and the bonuses and the benefits of joining and belonging to VIMQ. What became apparent in some of the meetings Mayor Tate and I attended was, and I don't know if Councillor Betters and I attended a couple too, was other munis might not be so aware of the benefits of this and were definitely resistant. You know, you see a sticker shock of a price tag. So our understanding is the province is committed to re-engaging with all the municipalities this year. So anticipate a budget line in 2026 and beyond, most likely, but for 2025, it's felt like a pretty safe risk to take to not include that line.
Yeah, I believe that's gonna be in June when they do that assessment, so that would be a year.
The other piece that we also, just while we're on this, and I may be drifting a bit, but it's another potential cost impact, is we were also advised that with Surrey transitioning out of the RCMP, they were sort of a big fish that covered overhead, and then that their departure, everything remaining would be rebalanced and fall onto local governments. So we all pay a proportionate share, right? But when the big player is out, a lot of the costs will remain and then it gets rebalanced. But again, that's out, and it's just something to keep in mind. And where that lands, we don't know yet. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Well, moving on.
Okay,
Maybe, sorry, just before Mr. Curry starts, just to set the stage, well, just looking at the timing, and I know with breaks and stuff. So just to kind of a check-in is, Mr. Curry has a handful of slides left, going to talk a little bit about debt, staffing changes, reserve contributions, and then it's switching over to Ms. Lou to get into the capital conversation. So just so you can understand, Ben has about a handful of slides, going to get into property taxes for average houses and all that fun stuff, and some debt conversations. So,
Okay, so maybe we're at 2:30, we're an hour and a half in, maybe this is a good time to recess, okay? And we'll reconvene in 10 minutes, so it's 2:32 now according to my clock, so 2:42. Thank you.
yeah,
because I don't want to cut you off, we've got like two slides left or something.
no,
Like I might as well, because at least we can get.
for sure, I can get through those. I'll speed it up a little
Yeah, I was
bit.
gonna say,
These,
don't spend a much.
I've already talked about these, so
Yeah,
like, I'm just gonna be like, I've already mentioned these, so like,
Yeah.
just,
Yeah. here's
it's
the
really
district
here.
Shown in a
Yeah.
different way.
and I'm just gonna mention, I didn't talk about this one yet.
That's fine.
I have this note, and then I'm just gonna glaze over those.
Yeah, yeah.
And then these two, it's like, it's very similar to the
Yeah,
prior
just
year,
kind of-
but
Yeah, and then the debt, because it will just be interesting talking about the debt a little bit.
yeah.
And then these can just be.
I'm not saying all this,
Do you want to
don't,
talk about this at this stage?
I'm not saying all this.
Yeah.
I've just put it in case
Just
I'm,
see a little sort of getting tired. So.
yeah, but it's getting heavy.
Public hearing.
Hey, feel free to just throw things back at me.
And if I may draw everyone's attention back to our meeting, please. We are on finishing up the budget on our CMP. Anything more on that slide?
Yeah, just a few more things to add to this slide. Just it had come up in the discussion about equipment. There is more detail provided in the letters we received from the RCMP, and if the council wished to see that, it is likely could be provided at an in-camera, just because there's just some safety issues with the information that's in there. So that it does include the body cameras, though, just for confirmation that it does have some extra expenses in there related to it, and it details exactly what it is. And then I just wanted to also talk about the three major challenges with funding the RCMP budget over the last number of years. You can see from 2022 to 2023, this is when we've only added one member. And you can see the cost has gone from 2.4 million to 2.9 million. This is when we became responsible for 90% of the cost of RCMP. So just that, and then also closing the funding gap of budgeted officers to approved officers. So we've typically always budgeted for what we've actually paid for or close to, and always had a surplus. So we're trying to close that gap by funding more officers. Currently, the way that our approval and principal letters are written for 2024, the letter was written that we have a budgeted amount of 14 officers and an approved amount in contract of 16 officers. So we're trying to close that gap by funding more, and we were hoping to fund 15 in this budget year to close the gap as well. So then also increasing the members for 24/7 coverage. So our current financial plan is to get it to 19 members within the 5 years of the financial plan. So we're just looking at 2025 today. We purposely left out the other years, which we're going to talk about in more detail at the next meeting. But in the next meeting, you'll see more how the outlook will look for 2026 to 2029. And we'll see with including VIMQ, and then also the cost of adding additional officers and at what pace that you're willing to do that. Because the sooner you add those officers means some pretty large tax increases. So you'd be approving a 5-year financial plan with double-digit tax increases for a few years to come if we're going to get there quickly, or if we're going to spread that out over the 5 years and see if we can get there slowly with more modest property tax increases. So this next slide here, I'm going to move a little bit quicker here just so we have enough time to get through everything. This slide here, this comes back from, this is from Urban Systems when they presented the asset management plan to council back in April or December of 2023. The recommendation at the time was that the council directs staff to provide options for a general asset management financial strategy in 2024 budget deliberations with the options of a 2 or 3% tax increase. So since then, we've added a bylaw that represents the asset management reserve fund. And then through that, it has dedicated 2 to 3%. And there is just, I wanted to remind council, there is an option in the bylaw that states each year council may amend the tax increase percentage for that year by unanimous motion of all council members. So council does have the option to change that amount from 2%. So it's not as though it's a mandatory, you must do this. Just quickly on this next slide here, this is the 2025 staffing changes. I have touched on each of these positions already in the non-discretionary changes and discretionary. The first one is the firefighter I talked about, which would be an April start. The next one is the executive office coordinator. This position provides dedicated support to the CAO, HR, communications, and the economic development departments. This support frees up staff time, enhancing our organization's capacity and having the immediately positive impacts on these service areas. So this position has been hired already, so that's why it's considered not discretionary. The parks labor for $38,000, bylaw auxiliary support. So this position is filled on a part-time basis, and we're looking just to move the funding source from COVID to taxes. And the last one here is the finance auxiliary support. This is a combination of the clerk and the senior financial accountant. This next tab here, this includes the reserve fund contributions. So these are amounts that flow through revenue and then get transferred to reserve. So we receive the funds, and a portion of it is sometimes is based on taxes received. So 24,000 for the Sooke Program of Arts. This has been ongoing. 464,000 for the asset management reserve, as we've kind of been talking about all along. This is the additional bump by 2%. The 260,000 received for casino revenue, this comes in as revenue and gets transferred to reserve. Future police reserve, this is based on traffic fine revenue of 85,000. It's an ongoing amount that we transfer to reserve each year. 750,000 received for the community building fund. This is formerly known as gas taxes. 50,000 to the fire equipment reserve and 162,000 to the sewer reserve. So the fire equipment reserve contribution is a new one. We were able to do this through just some reorganization of the reserve contributions from that capital asset replacement contribution that we used to have that now exists as the asset management reserve. The 162,000 to the sewer reserve is based on the surplus for sewer. So when you take the sewer revenue fees over the expenses, we have a $162,000 surplus, which goes right to reserve for essentially for asset management for the sewer. So replacing and maintaining existing infrastructure. This next slide here is for debt management. This shows the debt and debt principal and interest expenses for the year. You can see here we just have the new fire pumper truck, which comes on. The truck was received at the end of last year and then comes on for a debt payment this year. You can see that the total debt servicing has increased. However, we were able to do this and fund this without a tax increase from what I mentioned by reallocating the former transfer to reserve for the capital asset replacement. So previously that went, funds went into this reserve, then back out for debt. So I've just essentially changed that and now it goes straight that we tax for this debt. So the taxes are covering the cost of the debt here of 800,000. We have a few of these items which are coming up, which will be finishing soon. The debt for sewer, so the 300,000 principal and 160,000 interest, as finishes in 2026. At which time we'll be coming forward with some new options for the next sewer fee structure. I believe we're going to start working on it this year, and council should see some options before the end of the year, so that we have something in place by the end of the year for 2026. This next slide here, I talked about this last year during budget deliberations, and I just wanted to update council on the cost of borrowing. Today's rate right now for long-term borrowing is 4.56%. This is changed from 4.97%. It hasn't come down as much as we hoped. Just wanted to show you that the cost compared the cost of borrowing for 2024 was $2,053,000 for $30 million, and now the cost is $1.9 million. So it's a difference of just over $100,000 here from the prior year. So with the rates coming down, we'd save $100,000 a year if we were to borrow $30 million today. And just for thought as well, that equals to I guess it equals $229 per homeowner on average, or $19 per month. So this next slide here just shows the cost if like we had borrowed when interest rates were at their lowest, which the long-term borrowing rate in 2020 was 0.91%. Same slide that I had last year, and just to show it's less than $1 million a year, so $835,000 a year to borrow $30 million. So just to emphasize that when interest rates are low, that's the time to borrow and the time to take on these larger capital projects. So it just wanted to bring these stats forward again. I had included this with the report to council or to the committee in November. We selected municipalities in BC with a population between 10 and 20,000 for comparison. This includes 22 municipalities in total. And then in addition, we compared ourselves with the Vancouver Island municipalities. And we don't do anything with these stats. It's just helpful to know, is to check in what the neighbors are doing. And at the same time, like there isn't any manipulation of the stats. I grab the stats from the local government data bank. I sort them, and this is how they come out. There's nothing being manipulated, but kind of want to just show the theme that in all ways that I look at us in comparison to the others, like we do have a lower tax base. We have a lower than average cost for general municipal, lower than average by total taxes collected. And it's the ongoing theme whichever way I look at the stats. So this first one here shows the general municipal taxes paid by average house. This shows us in comparison with the municipalities, all municipalities in BC between 10 and 20,000, and we're the second lowest. So some things to keep in mind is that it's important to note that the results of the property tax comparison on this slide, the tax rates are only one aspect of the liability question. This is because some municipalities have services provided by the regional districts, the rec departments, water services, and fire departments. It's not apples to apples. It is apples to oranges, and we understand that. I think this one particularly, because I have firsthand experience working at the District of Sechelt and understanding their budget line by line. They sit right in the middle here, where they're at 2,169 by average house. If I was to compare us directly with them, parks there, I guess their seasonal flower beds and everything is just a little bit higher standard, but at the same time, they pay double for their parks. Their parks have a budget of over 2 million, where we're operating with close to 1 million for our park staff. Also, a difference would be that their park staff don't do garbages, and they're just solely working on the gardens and landscaping, where they have a public works department in Sechelt that does the garbages and like does the weed eating in the ditches and some of the standard maintenance for the roadways. So that's just one comparison to make. And also, like they only pay 70% of their RCMP, so we're paying 90% of our RCMP, which makes a big difference as well. And included in that amount there is not fire, so they have a fire improvement district. So we understand that that's kind of the same for all of these, but it's still nice to know where we stand as a benchmark with these other municipalities. This next slide here is the total taxes on a representative house. So the last one was just the general municipal amount, the amount that stays here in the district. This is the amount when you include the school amounts, the school amount, the regional district, the BC Transit, BC Assessment, the MFA amount. So all the other taxing jurisdictions are included here. So when comparing us with the other municipalities, we're the lowest. So we have the lowest on average. So they use the same amount of house, the average amount of residential taxes is calculated the same in each municipality. So this is based on the average house value. So it works. It's not as though they're picking the same value of house. So it is based on the average value based on the assessment totals in that municipality. So here, Sooke shows us the lowest total taxes. So total taxes in our range of 10,000 to 20,000. This next one, I know this kind of got some grumblings in the community about measuring per capita. We don't use this statistic for anything except for the point of reading it and saying, hey, we are the lowest per capita. And that this is just what it is. And they do report this. The province collects this data, and they're the ones who provide this stat for all of the public. So of the 22 municipalities, we're the lowest per capita. That does include children, as was mentioned earlier. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So this is the lowest taxes per capita here at 801. This slide here, a little bit different. This shows the total general municipal expenses. So I grabbed, this is from a different data source, still on the same website, but this is from the financial statement information when you report on just the expenses of each of these these municipalities. So second lowest total expenses. So just to show it in a different way that we still have quite a low tax base compared to the other municipalities, but also that we have lower expenses. And at the end of the day, we are still trying to do the same, but with less. And that's kind of the theme of these stats, is to show that we want to do more and we're trying to do more, but we're still doing it with less than other municipalities. If we were in the average or in the middle, we wouldn't be having the same sort of discussions at budget, and we would have a lot more resources, and we'd be able to do a lot more, and the service levels would be talking about actual additional services we're providing instead of just getting by with the minimum. The total general municipal taxes collected on this next slide here, this includes the total amount of taxes that we collect that stays here. So this is another way to look at instead of per capita or by average house what it's paid, but this is the total amount that stays here for our operating budget. So this does include just the taxes, and it also includes the library as well in here too. So that's why it's above it's above the 12 million amount you've seen earlier in the presentation. So that concludes my part of the operating budget. I'm gonna pause for questions, but then just pass it on to Rose to jump into capital.
Okay, I'll ask members. Go ahead, Councillor McManus.
Are those all reflective of 2022? Because the one has the
Just the
2022, but
just
for
the one,
rest-
sorry, the one, they're all 2024, and just the one with the operating expenses is 2022. So the financial statement data was up to 2022, but they had posted 2024 taxes. So just the one slide was 2022 numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre.
Through your worship, this number may have already come up, but I was just curious, when you look at that 16% that's been put forward for our consideration, how much of that is actually non-discretionary?
Sure, I could going back to slide.
I think I missed that, sorry.
I guess the sixth slide, that's the very start of the presentation. Non-discretionary is 2.17% of the budget we're proposing.
So 14 approximately is non-discretionary.
That's right.
Okay, I could have done the math myself, but I didn't notice.
That's okay.
Anything else from members of council? Just go ahead, Councillor Bateman.
Just a word of thanks to Mr. Curry for this kind of comparison, because when I came into here in 2018, we were, I think, still dealing with these 5-year financial plans, which were just seas of numbers and without context. And the whole point of the game was to keep the tax increase low as possible, but we never had the context to look at. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Just an aside on the 2025 staffing changes, just if this goes, it is public facing, you may just want to change some of the photos, because the executive coordinator is our wastewater plant and the parks laborer has a shot of our fire truck. I'm picking, but I don't understand the relation between those two, and the others are a bit more straightforward. So just throwing that out there. You know, just, okay. Do members of the public on this particular section have anything?
Ellen Lures, in case I forget my name. Okay. There's a few things. Okay, where do I start here? First of all, the municipal comparisons, municipality comparisons. I like to know the comparisons. Are they really equal to us? Do they follow volunteer fire department? What are the police numbers? How many parks do they have? And their land, also the size of the land that they have to deal with, because we're a district and we're a pretty large municipality. So just like to know those things. And some other questions I have too is, not that it was brought up, but where does the park, when money is given in lieu of parks, where does that land?
Okay, so there's two pieces there. And I appreciate your first part, and that's why, as Mr. Curry said, it is an apples to oranges comparative. And so we could dive into that, but I think that's where you'll find no two local governments are uniquely the same. You
No,
know, you find one in the mainland, they're gonna have a massive snow clearing budget and other equipment related to that we don't have. And that's just the difference, or the urban, the rural age of the time, they're no two the same, but it's just something
Mhm.
to have. So we appreciate that. The parks, the funds in lieu of parks, does that go into the Park Reserve Acquisition Fund? So it's only to acquire
There,
park.
that's correct. There's a parkland reserve and there's also a reserve for land. So there's two different places where we reserve money for land.
There's
And-
two different places where the money goes from the parks.
It
Money from parks.
it
Mhm.
does, that's correct. So it would be like held in its own separate reserve account
So what's it held for?
for us to get direction from council when initiatives come up that we would have the opportunity to use it.
Okay.
To acquire another park, say, so it has to be
So we can
used for
spend
the
more money.
acquisition of
Okay, got it.
parkland. Yeah,
Okay, so DCCs, where does the money go from DCCs? Where does that land?
This might be more, I could answer these on the side if you want. But like DCCs go to, when they're received, it's considered, deferred revenue. So it goes to deferred revenue and then it's at the time when it's used with the project, it's recognized. So I had mentioned this in the PowerPoint that the number you see for DCC revenue is our anticipated revenue from the development. But at the end of the year, that money gets put into a liability account and then we can't recognize it until at the time it's used. So when we're doing projects that require DCC funding, at that time it's recognized in our financial statements. So it's an accounting step that we do at the end of the year, but it's all accounted for and moved per the accounting standards and closely watched by the auditors each year. They track where it goes and how it's accounted for.
and that's because we have a DCC bylaw that is specific to DCC eligible projects. And that's
Mhm.
kind of locked in and we just reviewed it, I think last year.
It's like a general revenue then?
No,
No,
no. So that's where like Charters Road is now a DCC road. So the funds, certain amount of funds were used for that specific road.
okay,
But we can't just take it and use it to lower taxes. It's specific to those projects identified in the bylaw.
okay, and where we are with the sewers, are we up to speed with the sewers? Do we have enough sewer capacity?
Yes, because the plant has been expanded and now the force main is being upgraded. If you drive down West Coast Road, you'll see that, but the plant itself is plenty of capacity, not plenty, but I would say meets today and future anticipated needs. And that's
Or
where,
coming across the bridge?
no, it's specific to what's in the core.
Right, okay, okay, thank you.
Thought I had 2 minutes to speak or something there. No, James Holloway, regarding the e-com train wreck, how can I help? Is this a call to my provincial MP?
Provincial MLA and,
Provincial MLA,
yep,
sorry. Yeah.
and he's well aware of it since he was at this table before, but it does help to write to him as well as the Solicitor General who is new.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the Minister of Municipal Affairs would be another.
It's not bad.
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Through your worship to council and members of the public, I'm pleased to present the 2025 capital budget, which allows the district to plan for the infrastructure needs and enhance service levels. Through the public survey conducted last year, Sooke residents have expressed their desires and needs for better community planning, more parks and green spaces, and improved transportation, which will add value to Sooke's local economy. We have taken these comments into consideration when preparing the budget with a total investment of 9.8 million in capital improvement. Out of the $9.8 million, budget 2025 proposed 70% to be allocated to transportation and parks at a total of 6.7 million. More than half of parks budget is put into the Manuel Creek pedestrian crossing bridge, which is part of Sooke's active transportation system. The district's council and staff have worked diligently to address the traffic issue faced in Sooke by improving roads and expanding the trail network. In this budget, about 15% is allocated to sewer at a total of 1.4 million and 16% for other projects at 1.6 million. We're going to get into more details in the following slides. Looking ahead on the operations budget, the district is planning a midpoint review of the transportation master plan in 2025 and invest 785,000 in road design. We're approaching the final design stages for key projects such as the Throop Connector, Phillips Corridor, and Charter South and Highway 14 intersection. These projects will be scoped, costed, and planned in 2025 so that we'll be ready for the next steps. In 2025, we will finish the final phase of Charters Road with a budget of 147,000, including the hydro work to power the street lights. The substantial part of the project was completed in 2024 with the reopening of Charters Road to two-way traffic in October. Also, we have allocated 1.2 million for bridges safety repairs and upgrades. And the public had the question, what are the bridges? These are the three bridges, Todd, Connie, and Phillips. Those are the three bridges that. Three.
Sorry, what was the first one?
Todd, Connie, Todd, and Phillips.
Oh, Todd Creek.
Todd
Okay.
Creek, sorry.
Yeah, Connie and Phillips.
The operations 2025 capital budget is focused on transportation. Again, we do listen to residents' comments about Sooke's traffic issue and take them into consideration when preparing the capital budget. Okay, this is the next slide. Let's move to parks, and here are some highlights of parks capital budget. The Manuel Creek pedestrian crossing tender was awarded in January this year. The project is anticipated to be substantially complete by October 2025. At a budget of 2.7 million, the majority of the funding source is coming from grants. The park's capital budget also includes the continuation of the multi-use sports box facility in Ravens Ridge Park. We'll invest 750,000 to finish the project this year. Also, the district will conduct a parks and trails master plan midterm review. In addition, the district will put in 50,000 to replace some irrigation systems and 100,000 to upgrade some playground equipment. The park's capital budget is proposed at a total of 4.4 million in 2025. So on the next slide, we'll move to administration. In 2025, with a budget of 158,000 funded by grant, we have the mandate to update our OCP associated with the new small-scale multi-unit housing provincial legislation. We will upgrade the payroll and asset management software in municipal office administration, and the administration capital budget is proposed at 346,000. In addition, we'll invest 320,000 in fire department's vehicles, equipment, and training. So on the next slide, we'll move to sewer. To support Sooke's population growth, we'll invest 1.4 million in wastewater upgrades. The West Coast Road Force Main project will continue and complete in 2025 with a budget of 807,000. We have also budgeted 50,000 to upgrade the current sewer parcel tax bylaw. Next slide will show you a list of the funding sources proposed to finance the 9.8 million capital budget. Yeah. So this chart will demonstrate that the chart. This chart will explain the funding sources. There are four main sources of funding for the district capital projects. The primary funding source for the 9.8 million is the government grant, reaching 6.3 million and represents 65% of all capital funding in 2025. The district's reserves provide 2.4 million or 25%. And we propose to use debt to finance 160,000 or 2%. The development cost charges provided by developers will finance 831,000 at 8% of the total capital funding sources. Here is a list of major roads construction projects proposed in the 5-year capital plan at a total of over $40 million. So 2025 is a year of laying the groundwork for moving forward with road construction planned ahead. Staff are currently working on grant applications to support the district's long-term capital project funding. So now we'll open to questions on the capital budget.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the slides. Questions from council? Go ahead, Councillor Pearson.
Yes, you went, okay, I need you to go back about 4 slides. Keep going, right there. Nope, yeah, right there. SSMAUH legislative updates, 158,000. What can I understand that?
That's the small scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have this much left over in the grant.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we still have that available?
We still have that available.
Yeah, to help with going forward for the.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. No, it answers the question.
That would apply then for the OCP.
Part of it, all of it can you use for OCP. That's up to council's direction.
Okay,
Thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre.
One slide?
Forward?
Yes, that's it. Oh, go back. One slide. There it is. Middle of the way, CRD, I assume it's annual fees for septic tracking. We haven't, I think, quite signed on to that. So I'm just curious what that's about. How does it, I'd like some more information about that line,
I would need some help from my colleagues.
please. Recommend it, but hasn't been, yeah, anyway.
It's just a carry forward in case we move forward with that this year. And we're just in talks right now with the CRD and what's being implemented. So nothing yet on that. And
So in case, but hasn't been.
yeah, it hasn't been approved yet. I
Perfect,
know
thank
that.
you.
Just to have the money as a line item, just in case.
Thanks.
Councillor McMath.
On that same topic, is this one of those pieces where we pull it out because we don't want to participate in it?
But it's under, so the portion of that is under the liquid waste management plan, and we're just currently still doing the operational certificate with the ministry at this point, and it'd be on them to enforce it, and they've made no indication at this point that they would like to move forward with it. So it's just a line item at this point, so we don't get caught without having the money lined up for it.
Okay, and the odor mitigation, is that specifically for the area West Coast Maple?
Yeah, that's for the lift station to do a reverse pressure system. It'll be following the completion of the force main upgrade.
Perfect. And then previously we have received, it's basically a fire apparatus lifespan matrix. I'm just wondering if there is a copy of that.
Like you'd like a copy of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll have that somewhere. right?
Yeah, in the past, we've had that and we actually use it quite a bit with finance when we're planning our capital. So it's something that we can share with you for sure.
I'd love that. Thank you.
Staff could just make a note to send it out. Just send it to all of council and then we'll all be curious about it now. Okay. Any other, go ahead, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah. So thank you, Ms. Liu. I'm curious about the OCP, the master plan review and the midterm master plan reviews. So will we be hiring consultants for that process, or what's the current thinking?
Maybe I'll start, and I don't know if Mr. Marshall would have anything to add. I think that's what we're about to figure out.
Okay.
The money's dedicated, and so I think Mr. Marshall and his team is just figuring out, getting up to speed where the current draft was at, and then anticipating providing a report back to council, which I presume with options of here's how we can move forward, and if council has a preference of how we move forward. I think it's just going to depend on how many changes council wants to make from the current working draft. I know we spent a lot of time working through different iterations, corrected, I believe, quite a few anomalies or concerns. And so I think it's just a matter of getting everyone back up at speed where we left this off and getting some direction from council on how much more work you want us to do going forward on this. Community engagement is going to be a huge piece of this. So I would imagine some consultant work would be needed to help in some capacity, but it hasn't been decided at this time.
Right. And so in terms of public, well, we'll be discussing it.
Definitely lots of conversation about OCP will be happening publicly this year.
And likewise, we have the John Phillips Memorial Park master planning process. Will that involve a charrette, or again, we'll get a staff report?
Again, absolutely to be determined. These are just, for right now, this exercise is to put aside some money for that. And then we'll seek council direction on the specifics of how you want that engagement to look. And as we do, we'll give you options and we'll work with council's direction.
Okay.
Councillor McMath.
Just on the topic of fire, wanted to touch base on the billing to BC Ambulance.
We haven't done it yet, but I think that's definitely something that we haven't received specific direction from council to do this, I think, but we are behind the scenes assuming that this direction will come officially at an upcoming meeting. So we are, obviously wanted to get the budget conversation happening first, and then that will be one of the next things. I think we'll can work on calculating calls and all of that stuff. Talk to the other municipalities that we know are starting to calculate what these costs are, and just making sure we're all working from the same song sheet as far as what we're including in those overall costs. And then absolutely in the next month or two here, I anticipate presenting some options to council on what that could look like, or at least getting that message out there.
Awesome. Thank you.
So it's timely, Councillor McMath. Prior to this, I did a interview with CTV News. They have been made aware by the union representing the paramedics of a no overtime. And I don't have that release, but the interviewer was asking about the impact and then asked if we still have cars going out and not returning and what was the status. And I shared that we still have the same amount of cars, but a growing number of service levels or service calls. And then that's where our fire and rescue service step in. And there's an impact on that we pay for in taxes. And then it's timely because we're heading into budget. So I don't know it's always what I say and then how it shows up on TV doesn't always sound as wonderful as I think it does. But that is a live piece again. And Brendan Strain has been following this for a number of years, just given where in some cases, when the fire and rescue team isn't available, then there's nothing responding, and the impact of our cars going in and not returning. So it's timely that it's just interesting that you're raising that right when that interview happened today. Thank you. I just have a question on the 2025 capital slide where it lists off on this one with the parks, and it has facilities, parks and environmental services. with some of these capital projects are currently in the works that we know of, and some have sort of been pending for a while. So I get asked a bit about the playground at Broom Hill and the equipment that fell apart. So will this potentially be playground to go in there, or is it just to fix playground equipment everywhere? And then also with the memorial wall, we've had different conversations over the years and different thoughts around what we want to do. But it's been some time where we still haven't done anything. So what would that look like? And it may be timely just to regroup on that to be okay. Where does council think? Because everything just costs more, and what logistically do we want to do? So if there's any feedback on either the playground equipment or the memorial wall.
Ms. Taylor will come up and can speak to that. And also for sure, she can provide some high level, but we can definitely come back in the February meeting with more details on some of these for sure.
With Mayor to Council, thanks for those questions. The Playground Improvement Fund was initially established in 2024. And so those funds were directed to safety improvements that were noted, and those have been addressed for 2024 largely. There was some remaining funds to add some accessible playground equipment at Woodland Creek Park. So that's what was accomplished last year. Going forward, there was some discussion about having some engagement with youth about what equipment they would like to see in terms of after we've addressed the safety improvements, how can we expand and make improvements? So I'd certainly like to do some engagement, but Broom Hill is a playground. It's our largest one. It is the most dire need of renewal. So we can't do the whole replacement with these funds, but we could look at prioritizing it and kind of chipping away at some updates there.
And then the other one was just on
the memorial wall. So we do have some updated information about permitting. So we're just trying to compile all that information, and we can come back with kind of a check-in on that project shortly so that you fully understand kind of all the implications of proceeding and what that design and rollout would be.
Okay, no, I think rather than just going ahead with it, it is timely, just the
To bring it.
visitation at the park has increased significantly, is just to regroup on that. And then the other piece I get asked about is there a small bridge that goes through Sun River has worn away. So some residents are just asking if and when that could be rebuilt. It goes over, I'm doing this, it goes behind, it's not on Sun River Way. I would say the trail kind of goes behind and catches up to Phillips Road, almost parallel to Sun River Way. It goes behind the childcare center and the dental clinic that's there.
Yeah,
I don't know what that corridor is called.
I believe that's the trail behind that connects Hannah Day Playground to Phillips Road. So that's one bridge on our radar. There's a couple others. Demamel Creek Park has a bridge, not the little river crossing, but another bridge replacement. So that material was all purchased. It's more of a delay due to staff being on leave currently, and that small bridge we've targeted to complete by the end of this month.
I think it's very cold back there right now. Thank you. Councillor St. Pierre.
Through your worship to Ms. Taylor, I'm curious about whether or not we have any sort of strategy for making use of people's donations for helping with things like playground equipment, or I think it feels like it's a sort of thing where, as a legacy project, people might be willing to donate to help out and make sure that the kids have good playground equipment. I don't know if, the Lions or other groups, but certainly that's the kind of thing that philanthropic organizations get involved with. Do we have a strategy for doing that sort of thing and making use of those resources that might exist? Not sure.
Through your worship to council, that's certainly an opportunity that I don't think that we've fully gotten hold of, but there's many examples out there in other jurisdictions where there's more of a formal foundation or donation program. Here we have many active volunteers that help us out doing, for example, restoration projects and boots on the ground type efforts and education, but less so in terms of specific donations, but maybe other staff have other examples that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, it feels like an actual strategy where the public knows that it's encouraged, wanted, and there's a path through to make it happen would be something that could help.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Can go back to the question slide, and I'll ask members of the public present if there's any other pieces to, any questions about this section? And sorry that you'll have to reintroduce yourself, but it's for those watching on YouTube.
I had a question with the
Sorry,
memorial.
Ms. Lures, you have to reintroduce
Oh,
yourself.
Ellen Lures. With the memorial wall, I remember us talking about this in our last OCP. Is this for people who are being cremated?
Well, it would be for anyone that would want to remember, like to remember somebody. So
Right, so
you-
where
you-
was it going to go?
it was either on Whiff and Spit or in the Manuel Quimper area, just like Manuel Quimper Park, which is sort of where the washroom is just above the
Oh,
spit. But
okay.
in that vicinity is
Okay.
where it last landed.
Okay, because I remember us discussing it being in where the burial park is now,
The
on not Kaltassin, Idlemore. And
oh,
so
I see. No, my understanding is it was,
that was our
filling
discussion.
up.
I'm just asking.
yeah, it's moved because it's getting full there.
Okay, and I'm really concerned about that 4.4 million for the parks budget. That's a lot of money for parks budget. So, yeah, looking at some of those things, are they a need or are they a want? Some things, I think that we really have to tighten up. Are we doing things because we want them or because we need them? Just my thoughts. Thanks. Was another question too, with the Charters Road lights. I think you put 141,000 for the Charters Road lights. But is there a budget also set for the electricity that all these lights that go up in subdivisions, et cetera, is that part of the budget? Because it's electricity costs. Every year I see the electricity costs go up. So is there a budget set for that?
Do we pay for the signal lights on Highway 14? Or would that be the province that pays to power the traffic lights?
Oh, I wasn't talking traffic lights. I'm talking
Oh, like street lights.
street lights.
Street lights we
and
pay for.
lights and, yeah,
Yeah.
lights in the along our
Yes, we
roads.
budget and
Right.
on our roads, we pay for those street lights.
Right, right.
And with LED, they would be a lot more efficient, I would hope, than the lights of years past.
Supposedly, and also the maintenance of the
Yeah,
of the trees and the cutting the grass. And I know that in Sun River, for instance, I don't know if this is included in the budget, that we purchase the trees for every house.
no, those were provided by the developer and over time, many of them failed, so residents replaced them on their own. And the
I
ones
don't-
that are in the little parks were put in by the tree grants in the ones that are
I
there.
don't think so. I think you want to check on that because if the trees were provided by the district.
Well, CETA showed up and planted the one in my yard.
Well, I'd like to check on that.
I look forward to that.
And the budget, also the budget for the Phillips Road Bridge. If my memory serves me correctly, that was a temporary bridge that was supposed to be, it was supposed to be repaired by the developers. Initially, that was sort of a temporary thing. It was supposed to be maintained by the developers. Just if my memory serves me correctly, it's something you might want to look into.
Thank you. We'll follow up. Okay. Anyone else on this section? Anything from anyone else? If we can go to the next steps, there was like a next step. So sorry, Councillor Bateman.
I just wanted to
In the microphone.
Yeah, I was, a novelty to me were these pie charts, the circular pie charts you've created. Right, we'll use that one as an example. So when Mrs. Lewis talks about wants versus needs, we look here and we see that the wants are being funded by everything other than, I guess the reserve funds are being fueled through tax dollars. Otherwise.
Potentially, because some of them are grants that, you know, in the case of the work at Ravens Ridge, that was a grant, but that project is spanning a couple of years, so it's gone into the reserve fund. And the contribution in there was developer dollars. So not necessarily taxation, though we do sometimes when we have a surplus, which is a combination of everything, then council has put that into various reserves. The debt, you could see the servicing of debt could be taxation. DCCs is developer dollars. So, and then there's grants. So I would say the reserves, maybe a portion could be surplus from a previous year, or it's a carryover from projects that span several years.
And just to further add to that, it'd be things like gas tax, right? It's a reserve fund, it's not our taxes. The COVID reserve, the growing communities reserve, those are all be captured in there, so it's not necessarily very minimal. That I would say is originally a property tax source. I guess.
Thank you for that.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Yes, Councilor Bateman just reminded me of a question that I actually left by the side, and that was really in the list of fund contributions towards reserves. How many of them are actually discretionary as opposed to gas tax, money that is coming from other sources, not our own? How much of that is actually taxed where council has a choice of saying, let's not do that anymore?
I respect, without double checking, sorry, and I'm kind of cutting them off. Giving this committee of the whole. I would say almost none of them, because all of those reserve fund contributions are indicated in a bylaw. So if you would have to change the bylaw is the factors of what goes in and what comes out of that reserve fund. That's why it's in a reserve fund. So the bylaw dictates, like, as far as being optional, you would have, like, casino, that's not optional for us, for you to say gas tax. I don't, other than the capital asset reserve, I would have to, maybe we can bring in more detailed answer back next meeting. But other than the capital asset reserve, I can't really think off the top of my head that there's too many reserves that are optional contributions.
Well,
And even that one would now take a council vote to not be optional.
yeah, in my.
If that makes sense.
That does make sense, and I actually did note that the asset management was potentially discretionary.
Yeah.
But I was curious as to whether or not anything else was, and it sounds like that's not the case. Which is good. It just means that we don't need to look at that in terms of what we might want to change, because we can't change much of it.
For sure. And similar to the sewer, there's no option to use that sewer money for anything else. It has to go back in that sewer reserve fund. There's no option.
Okay, so can we go to the last, I think it was the what's next slide was just the outline so council and the public can see. So here we are today, and then there has in our agenda, which we'll move to after this, is just some discussion by council, and then we're looking at readings through February into March, and a March open house, and then a budget adoption in March. Mr. Curry?
I just had a few things to say to this slide, just to kind of wrap stuff up. So today we're seeking the committee's direction on any additional information needed and the requirements for council to support the 2025 budget moving forward. We aim to present this information to council in February along with the draft budget book, with the goal of completing the first 3 readings before the end of February. We plan to host the budget open house in early March, followed by budget adoption later in March. Council may consider a few options, like increasing funding from the RCMP reserve to offset the RCMP contract increase, exploring further options for funding, utilizing the remaining COVID restart reserve. We could provide the balance of the restart reserve. It is at this point, with the capital plan presented and the options in the current operating budget, we had approximately $50,000 remaining in the COVID restart reserve. there's a possibility that we could reallocate some of the funding in capital that's planned to come from the COVID Restart Reserve if you wanted to use that to offset operations. As the 2024 expenses settle, we'll have a clear idea of reserve balances at the end of 2024, and we'll be able to provide just essentially a reserve continuity report. So just what's flowing in and out of the reserves for 2024 to have a better outlook at what's in the balances. So with that, we'll turn to council, the committee for guidance on the next step for the proposed budget. Thank you.
Okay. So, council, thank you, and thank you staff for your presentation and everyone for their participation today. So we have a lot more understanding now of where these numbers come from, although it's still, so just looking now to see where council would like to go with this. So the easy part of this is just to receive it for information because we've done that. It almost seems a bit redundant because we can't really not receive it now. But it's more the second part is to stay the course with what it is or to provide maybe some options back. On where everyone is. Councillor Beddoes, let's kick this off.
Yeah, well, 16% scares me. Yeah, I'm sure I'm not alone there. But I'm sort of a little bit at a loss on how to get it down. I would need to have staff give me some options. So, I mean, I could throw a 10% in there, but I don't know how realistic it is. So, a little bit of a quandary on how to proceed with that motion because unfortunately I'm not the expert, and you saw the mountain of information that we went through today and the questions. I'm really sort of the loss as to what to suggest, unless some of my colleagues have got a better idea.
Councillor St. Pierre.
Well, I think my first thought is that having done that very simple math, 16 minus 2.17, it sounds like about 14% of this is non-discretionary, which is to say that due to inflationary pressures and things that we contractually have to pay for, and I think staff confirmed that, we have about 14%, a little less than 14%, that I don't know if we can even touch. And that would be a good question for staff. Is there any way to even reduce that 14%? Because right now that doesn't seem to be the case, at least to me, and that's my understanding. What that leaves is the 2% in terms of where staff, I think, is actually, as we can, I think we can feel in the room, they've given up any thought of the major staffing increases and so on and so forth, and are basically looking at very small amounts to basically tide things over and hope that at some point protective services won't be basically eating up all of the actual staff increases. Other than that, I think we have the asset management at 2%, which is up for grabs. We could really look at whether or not we need 2% or 1%, whether or not we want to hope that we can actually find other sources of funding to basically manage our infrastructure, given that it's already not quite enough, but indications are that it could be very helpful. So my sense is that the public's not going to like this no matter what, because I think we're looking likely at a minimum of 14%. And if that's the case, then I'm almost thinking, given that all the work that's been done to reduce the costs, either go with the 16% or we start spending out reserves. And I don't mind doing that at all, and see if we can get it out of 15 or 14 by spending out reserves. It doesn't leave with much to go on the next year after, and it puts us in a more vulnerable position, but that's something we could do if the optics of 16 is bad. But I think the optics of 14 is bad too. So I don't know. I don't know that it really helps to spend out the reserves. Well, that's my
the challenge, like a reserve is good if it's a capital project, because it's like you need to buy all the materials to build X and then it's done and then you maintain it after this. using the reserve to offset the taxes means we have to still find the money in a
Next
couple of
time,
years.
right.
We're kicking it down the road.
We're just kicking it down the road, which is what
And
we've
then you
done.
have to pick it up again, which is why we're here. And we're stuck with these big expenses. To me, the discretionary, okay, I'll take this seriously. The discretionary one here, I mean, with asset management, I still think it's always important to save. And even when the income is low, you still want to keep up the habit of saving. So maybe that is reduced, but it's more, you know, sorry, province, we can't afford e-com this year. But then again, I don't know what it looks like to not pay a provincial bill, a provincial download. So that's the 3%, but it's, or, you know, in some of these pieces, like I heard today that, you know, tragically there was a fire on Penelakut and the fire crew there did not have full turnout gear, did not have proper equipment, and some have had peril as a result of that. So we have to ensure that the crews are fitted out for the job. There may be some ways, and we can ask staff, like, is there anything that you could delay the start of, the hiring of, and then, but it will come back next year in the budget once someone has been onboarded. And then in terms of other fees, our only other lever then is to increase development fees and charges. And then when you look at, okay, you know, I can see everything else, and some may say, well, don't have the streetlights on. Others would say, why are there no streetlights? Or don't pay the annual pay bill. Now you have people that don't know where the center line is. So the line painting is important. And software we just need for safeguarding all of our equipment and everything else. So, and I appreciate that, you know, everyone is in a really tough financial times. We always have been and we always are. So I need some guidance from staff. Like, obviously, anything you can do to whittle this down would be great. But my concern is that if you use a reserve, we still have to find the money unless it's buying something, which you can see with the grants, they're allocated and it's done, but we still need to find funding later to offset the operating of. So I don't know. I'm stuck. I'm stuck too. Counselor Beddoes.
I would like to make a motion that we just receive it for information, because it is that, or because I am not ready to put a percentage in there until we get more information from staff.
Counselor McMath, or so there is a motion. So let's start with that one. Receive it for information. Can we just do that because we've received it? Okay, I'll clear that. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Okay, Counselor McMath.
I would just like to hear from staff whether what is going to be the simplest piece for them? Like, do they want us to go through here line by line and have us debate what we think can go and what we think should stay? Or do they want guidance where we give a reduction by 5% and then they come back and give us that report and then they self triage?
Through the mayor to Councillor McMath. Yes, that's the kind of what staff are hoping to get from council today, was just a first introduction of the numbers and just to clarify, like, yes, in a perfect world, if we're not going to use reserves, then the number's 16%. But as we know, every year we have to rely on reserves. It's just a nature of the beast right now. So it's just a matter of how much reserves we're going to use. COVID has been our big baby one that has been funding a lot of these pressures for the years. So this could be another year. And again, we'll make that work on the capital side. It's always, nothing's ideal. But I think that's what we were hoping to confirm with council, is we didn't assume that 16% was going to be plausible or realistic. So if it's something like, you know, like you said, throw a 5% reduction overall, then that gives us something to work with, and we can kind of start playing around with the reserve funds, the impact in the out years of what that means. Then if we used all the COVID for the RCMP, if we drain the RCMP surplus, there's a bunch of moving pieces we can kind of work behind the scenes once we just didn't want to do all that work and come back with, say 14%. You guys are like, no, we wanted you to be at 10. So as long as we could at least get an idea, a range, we knew it wasn't 16. It was more of like, what's the number that at least a little more comfortable, appreciating this won't be the final number, but it just gives us an idea of how much we need to scale back. We will re-examine, the start dates, all of those discretionary things could potentially go and be risk managed. And so while there's the must-haves that we have to fund, we'll find funding for those, but the others, that's just part of what you pay us for, is to figure out how to make that work, and then make sure you understand the longer term impact, and eventually all of these will need to come into the tax fold when COVID runs out. But that's was the idea, is we can come back with a budget book built out at 16%, but we know that's not going to be the final number. So yeah, unless there's something specific, council was like, no, definitely don't even bother funding that, which I don't get the pulse that is the case. If it was just, something 5% less, then that can give Mr. Curry and Miss Lou some marching orders to work behind in the next few weeks here.
Okay, back to Councillor McMath.
What I'd like is the proposal now, and then not that it's a locked in thing, but just what that would look like, so we could show the community, if we reduce this is going to be the cost to the services to the community. So it's easier to showcase that. And then when we have feedback from the public, then it helps support the decision that we make. So like I would look, what was our percentage? 14?
It was 16.
14 non-discretionary.
So if it's a 10% tax increase, what does that look like? And what are the cuts to services that the community would have?
Okay, so how about that? The committee of the whole recommends the council direct staff to provide a report on an updated 2025-29 financial plan that includes a residential increase to not exceed 10%.
Perfect.
And we'll just leave out, to
not saying that we'll go for the 10%. We might be like, let's go 20, but just that way, then it's easy to showcase what that means to these projects and to these services.
For sure. And understanding, like, obviously we'll do everything we can to get anything below double digits. So we won't just like, all options are on the table at this stage. It was just our first conversation about this. So just appreciate a bit of guidance on exactly if 10% is kind of at least closer to a range that council would be comfortable supporting, that gives us clear direction to bring something forward to you.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I'd just like to reemphasize what Councillor McMath just said, which is, I think it's going to be incredibly important, not just to have the numbers, but also to have the consequences. Like what's the cost down the line? So for example, if we're dipping into reserves now, we're just offsetting for a bit. Next year, we have to come up with that money somehow. So I think there's a piece where we really, and that doesn't normally get shown. And I think often the accounting speak really goes over my head, and I know it's going over the head of most of our residents. So what does that mean to them if you actually reduce from 16 to 10? And that'll make it easier for us too. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pearson.
Yes, I appreciate the motion, and I think it is a starting point. I appreciate what staff has put forward. I think we have to be cognizant that, you know what, it's tough times out there. There's an economic reality that could hit us, at an event that happened today. People are struggling for every $20 for groceries and things like that. So it is important that we remember that. I think a good job in communication, because if we celebrate what we're doing at low cost, an example of the little river crossing, those are the communication pieces that we have to include in this. We also have to be aware is that this is only our portion. This is not the CRD, the school and all of the other things. And we're talking about, a couple of $100 per year from families who are struggling right now with looming a lot of other things going on there. It's tough. So I will support it being pared back as much as we can, but we also have to be aware of that, we're providing service. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm pleased to see this 10% number coming in. I mean, in the 5-year current plan, we've targeted 8.98% would be the increase in 2025. However, you've come through with a very clear, clean, it's all essential. Even that non-discretionary material is essential in a perfect world. And as it turns out, we Sooke taxpayers do live in a pretty perfect world, given the low impacts on our tax bills over 20 years. So thank you for really documenting that. I think that's something to celebrate, that we in fact have been able to deliver so much with so relative little. Whatever this tax increase this year will be potentially matched with the referendum matter. Now, Mr. Curry, I think, what was that number? 229 per year over, that would be for $30 million borrowing. Yeah, okay. So effectively, we would be up over 30%, combining, should such a referendum question be successful, whatever that referendum question is. Anyway, I'm pleased to see 10%, and I look forward to you. I think last year you came in at 13.5%. And we asked for below 10% because that double-digit number is such an optic, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I believe we came back with 9 point something and
Yeah,
then
you took it up a
council
little.
opted to not use as much reserve funds to get it to the 10.54, I believe is where we settled last year.
Okay, Counselor Beddoes?
Through the chair to staff, we were looking at these tax exemptions, one like Drennan building down there. We're going to review that this year, but it's not going to affect the taxes this year, correct? It'll be for the next year. Because I thought that, I don't know how much is out there, but I assumed it'd be like $1 million in tax exemption. And maybe we can get some of those people to carry a bigger share. And then with that in mind, for the 26th year, you know, if we could pick up $300,000 or $400,000 out of that, it will help immensely. But we may have to, you know, we don't have an industrial base, but we do have a lot of these people living in our community that do need to pay their share of police, fire, and all those things. And I know I was voted on and I accept that vote, but we either get some money out of them or the province to offset those costs, because that's getting to be a larger and larger share of our overall tax base that we're not getting anything for, and yet we're supplying services for that area. So I think that's somewhere that we might have to give some hope to the taxpayer, because I understand what Councillor Pearson is saying. There is an area, a group of people in this community that are really having a tough time paying the bills. And some people are getting a bit of a free ride. And I know people with mortgages that they're just deathly afraid to renew them because they can't do it. So it's a tough one, but I'll go with the 10%, see what we get with. And we need to look in the future. Our job is not this year. Our job is for a number of years down the road. And we need to have a look at that and see if we can get some more revenue in from people that should be paying more. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bagnall?
Pardon me, just clarification. It's less clear in committee of the whole if it was moved. Was the motion
was.
moved? Great.
It was moved
Thanks.
by Councillor McMath, so we're just speaking on it now. So I will call the question on the motion. All those in favor, please? And that's carried unanimously. And there is also a business arising motion, so this will go procedurally. This is one that Councillor McMath is making, a business arising, that staff, council direct staff to invite Ecom 911 President Oliver Gruder Andrew to present in an upcoming District of Sooke budget to speak on the costs being downloaded onto the District of Sooke residents. I will forward that to Bagnall. So this here then is the business arising. It should have gone. And that was the part that we spoke of earlier. That's council direct staff to invite Ecom 911 President to present at an upcoming District of Sooke budget meeting to speak on the costs being downloaded onto the District of Sooke residents. Would you like to make that motion?
If I may, I'm just going to tweak the beginning that the committee of the
Oh.
whole recommend that council.
Sure, thank you, because we're making recommendations to council, yes. So let's move. Go ahead, or good, okay. So we vote on this, so here it is here, for everyone, and that ties into our earlier conversation about the e-com costs. Okay, so that's moved by Councillor McMath. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? That's carried unanimously, so those will flow up to the regular council meeting. And yes, go ahead.
I just had one thing that just popped in to my head now. I'm sorry, it should have come earlier. Just in the slideshows with the wording around the cost of e-com. I'm gonna find an example. So new costs for emergency dispatch services. I think the language is confusing, and perhaps like a more accurate representation would be like 911 answering service.
Okay, because it
those
is
pieces
different.
Are very separate.
Yeah, fire and ambulance are different than this one.
And even the police dispatch itself.
Okay.
So the dispatch, so there's Econ Vancouver Island, that's everything south of Ladysmith. That is a separate entity to what this cost is. So if you, the way this reads is that it's paying for that work in those positions, but it's, if memory serves, it's the 911 answering solely, which is different.
Okay. Yeah. We can adjust that for sure. Thanks for that catch. Okay, anything else? I think that concludes our agenda. I just forwarded you all speaking of ministerial orders, a letter from the minister about the small scale multi-unit housing legislation and the ministerial order and next steps. So that will come to the next regular council meeting for discussion. But as we were talking about ministerial orders, it seemed in line to mention it, and it came during this meeting. How appropriate. So on that note, I'll call that the January 20th, 2025 committee of the whole meeting be adjourned. Moved by Councillor McMath. All those in favor, thank you everyone for your work today. We are adjourned.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.